Runaway brides and grooms, why they ditched their fiancés at the wedding. My mum thought she'd been left at the altar by not only my dad, but the minister as well. She hated being the centre of attention and didn't look up from the ground until she was almost down the aisle. When she did, there was nobody waiting for her. Just then, the door behind the altar flew open and my dad ran out with his kilt flapping around, followed by the minister. Apparently, they'd been drinking whiskey in the minister's office and hadn't realised the ceremony had started. This is maybe the most Scottish story I've ever heard. A guy I knew did this. He was a nice, laid-back guy marrying a really nasty person. I can't really get into the details because I didn't know him too well, but apparently his friends had been telling him to break it off from the beginning. They had a final intervention for him the morning of the wedding, and they finally convinced him to just leave. He showed up at this festival I was at during what was supposed to be his wedding day. I saw him and said, "Oh, hey man, aren't you getting married today?" And he had this kind of faraway look and said, "Yeah, that's not happening anymore." Not the altar, but I bailed just 2 days before we were headed to the city hall. It was a green card marriage. On our second date, she mentioned that her visa was expiring in 6 months, and I jokingly proposed to her. We continued dating, we were falling for each other, and that proposal became much more real as the deadline approached. I backed out at the last minute because we just didn't agree on a few details. Living arrangements and finances were easy. What couldn't be negotiated was how seriously either of us wanted to take those vows. I wanted to at least attempt to be a married, monogamous couple. She didn't really want to commit to that. If she falls deeper in love, great. If not, we're just roommates. I miss her, but I think I dodged a bullet. I believe she probably would have just vanished on me at some point, and I could have been in a real jam over immigration crime. I mean, at least she was honest. I'm not saying that you should have done it, no way in hell I would have, but if she was a monster, she would have just lied to you. I didn't technically leave him at the altar, but 10 days before the wedding, I figured out he was sleeping with someone else. It took me 2 days to decide not to get married. Then over the next 3 weeks, I discovered he was addicted to whoopee and had been seeing other people for the entire 9 years we were together. Got real close to being stuck in that nightmare. I'm thankful every day that I didn't go through with it. I'm dealing with a husband with the same issue now, 6 months after the wedding. I wish I'd known beforehand. This is the worst time of my entire life. Well, most of our top-rated stories so far don't actually have the person waiting until the vows for their grand realization, but on balance, that's probably a good thing. It's way better to spare people that public humiliation on top of breaking their hearts and wasting their money. One of my best friends broke her engagement only a month before her wedding after he joked about kicking her in the face because he thought she hugged her stepbrother for far too long at her mum's anniversary party. She dodged a huge bullet since he was arrested for assaulting someone a year later. Not quite at the altar, but I was left several weeks before my wedding. And by left, I mean my fiancé insisted he was stressed out with work and needed some time. When in reality he wanted to move his new pregnant girlfriend into our house while I was out of town. So, the initial aftermath was indescribable, frankly. About 85% of our wedding was set up. Calling and explaining this to vendors was a total blast, believe me. I lived in and was getting married in the south, so if I never hear, "Oh bless your heart" again, it'll be too soon. Not to mention the crippling depression I fell into and the loss of a whole life I'd built with someone who I trusted. I didn't leave my parents' house for over a month afterwards. I also had to deal with my family and his and our friends, since he felt no reason to explain this to his side or anyone else and just assumed I'd do it, or they'd figure it out, I guess. To say this was a disaster is a huge understatement. I'm still recovering, mostly financially, but therapy has done wonders. My ex has a lot of mental issues and he's hid them well. And I've got to a place where I know I'm better off and that I dodged a huge bullet. I also recently started seeing a man who makes my heart race when he walks into a room. It's a beautiful thing. I got left at the altar. He spent the previous day spending a lot of time with his ex instead of helping me set up. I yelled at him about it because he was late and hadn't helped at all. He said he didn't want to get married because spending time with his ex made him realize I wasn't as fun as he was because I was uncomfortable with him doing substances. I kicked him out and still had the party. I told him to use that time to go home and pack up all of his crap. And he did. Then he got into smack and other stuff, so just yay. I left my ex-fiancée a month before the wedding. Backstory, I never actually proposed to her. She more or less did it to me. We were in a mall and she wanted to go to a jewelry store to look at engagement rings. I wasn't expecting to walk out of there with one, but we did. The salesperson even did a just engaged Polaroid for us. She became more and more controlling, and I couldn't take it anymore. After I left, her friend texted me on the day of the supposed ceremony telling me the cake was delicious. My ex somehow managed to break into my email and asked me who a girl was in an email I received after I'd left her. I could understand her reasoning, if it was before, but it wasn't. She also texted me a while after I left and told me she had missed her period. An hour later, I got another text that said, "Never mind, I'm pretty sure I dodged a bullet by leaving." Wasn't me personally, but if anyone here has any objection, speak now or forever hold your peace. A woman in the back stands up and says, "The groom can't be married as he's my husband." Turns out the woman who objected and the groom were in fact married and tried to get divorced, but the divorce was never completed. So technically the groom was still married and the wedding didn't proceed. I left her on the day before the wedding because on the bachelor party for me, one of her friends, who'd come with us as a "keep an eye on him so he doesn't sleep with an exotic dancer" insurance, drunkenly confessed that he knew my fiancé cheated on me with some D-bag for the last 2 months, all because she wanted one last fling. I also found out that some of my friends knew about it but didn't tell. She denied it but eventually confessed and tried to justify. We broke up, of course. I ended up having to sue her for all of the wedding payments I'd put out because I couldn't get back most of the down payments I paid, and her family wouldn't help with the wedding because they're cheap skunks. I won, and I got all of my money back because she was afraid it would be known. I found out the D-bag is actually one of the bosses at her work and he's married. The last I heard of her, she got knocked up by said D-bag, and he got custody of their child, and she's living with her parents with no job, wasting her life away. It's always the ones that are super paranoid that you'll cheat, because they're already doing it. People expect others to do what they do. I left a man at the altar. I was in my dress and getting ready to go to the chapel, when I realized I just couldn't. I froze. I didn't love him as much as I craved the safety and security that being married would bring. I was fairly recently divorced and very young and scared. He eventually found a lovely woman and they're very happy together. I don't think either of us would have had that with each other. It's good to hear that he found happiness elsewhere. Ultimately, you did the right thing. It's much harder and more expensive to get divorced than it is to break up. My brother left his fiancée a week before the wedding. Basically, as soon as he proposed, all she cared about was the wedding. He wanted a very small wedding and she wanted a huge one. She was also very religious, as her father was a preacher and he wasn't at all. She told him she wanted him to become a deacon in her father's church, and he told her no, he didn't want to do that. Pretty much they were disagreeing on everything after the proposal. Finally, he called it off. He said it was the hardest thing he's ever had to do, but he knew he made the right choice. Well, I typed 46th Street into the GPS, but it was actually on 64th Street. Nobody gets married on 46th Street. I was the one who was left at the altar while she didn't show up. Everything was normal in the months, weeks, and days before the wedding. She was excited, busily planning and organizing, then she just didn't show up on the day. I'd say that she might write her story here, but "I'm a fricking self-centered witch" isn't much of a story, is it? Her explanation to me was that she changed her mind. I've only spoken to her a few times since then, and that's the best I've got out of her. Saying she changed her mind is pretty rich coming from a girl who could never decide what to have for dinner. Not bitter at all. Why do you ask? It happened to 2 friends I used to know. He was totally smitten with her, she was highly insecure, and they used to fight a lot because she'd accuse him of looking at other women and other crazy stuff. She's never not been in a relationship, and she always has the next guy lined up before she leaves the current one. I guess this time it was no different. Days before the wedding, she called it off. We find out she's shacked up with the next one within weeks. I think he totally dodged a bullet. She's currently on her 3rd marriage. She might find it harder to get the next husbands to line up the more marriages she accrues. And yet again, we have evidence that cheaters are always real paranoid about their partners cheating. I don't imagine that's the last we'll see of it in this video. During rehearsal, my now husband and I didn't actually rehearse our ceremony, but just kind of talked logistics with our bridal party. As a result, when our ceremony was over, we didn't really know how to officially end it. So we just kind of stood there awkwardly for a few seconds until he whispered to me, "So, are you just gonna leave now?" Meaning that I was supposed to lead our exit. I, however, took it literally and just started walking. He claims that I ran away. I got about 10 to 15 feet away before he called out after me, "Wait, I think you're supposed to take me with you." It was very embarrassing, but apparently everyone found it hilarious and started laughing. Oh, I'll never live that down. My brother's friend got run over by a car at the church parking lot. He survived, but was hospitalized for a week. The car that hit him was from the catering service. Ugh. Well, I haven't seen one from an arranged marriage setup, so here goes. I backed out a week before the wedding. We were engaged in February, and the wedding was to be 4 months later. He had to leave the South Asian country where I lived, so our interactions were strictly over the phone. I'm pretty sure I was a bit of a C-word in this situation. I talked to him very irregularly until the end of February, and then I just couldn't. Should have been a huge red flag to him that his fiancée hadn't talked in 3 months. I didn't have the courage to tell my folks, so I just waited to see if he'd back out, and, well, he didn't. And well, that's when I told him that I wouldn't be marrying him, after the invites had gone out and preparations were already in full swing. Ugh. I can't tell what exactly turned me off about him. I do know the fake American accent absolutely killed it for me. But the people I talked to about this tell me that isn't reason enough. Maybe arranged marriages is just not meant for some people. I definitely think it was for the best in the end. We were poles apart and it would have never worked, though I could have handled it better, I suppose. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe to Am I the Genius? I dated a guy for 5 years and things were going well enough. When we were both approaching 30, I really wanted to get married and start a family, but he felt he wasn't ready. Somehow his family talked him into proposing, and when he did, he said, "Well, I suppose we should get married next summer." That's it. When I later asked if he was going to get me a ring, he said, "Why? You already said yes." The whole planning process was like pulling teeth. He didn't want any part in it, and I was not only paying for pretty much everything, I was also choosing all of the vendors, decorations, and music. One night I sat at the kitchen table, addressing all of the wedding invitations by myself, and then he came in, picked one up and said, "Those look kind of cheap," and he walked out. I'd made them myself to save some money, and he had never even seen them before. I cried, finished up addressing the letters, mailed them the next morning, and then I left him a few days later because I felt that I deserved someone who was excited to get married to me. I'd been worried about how our friends and family would react, but really, everyone was totally understanding and sweet about it. My grandma just said, "Oh, these things happen." His uncle told me. I was engaged once, but then she ran away and became a nun. At least she left me for Jesus. Seriously, nobody gave me a hard time about it at all. Even the vendors were very supportive. As for my then fiancé, he was sad and cried, but ultimately, I think he was relieved that he didn't have to get married. All in all, he wasn't a bad guy. On the contrary, he was a total sweetheart, but the thought of settling down and taking on responsibility scared him to death somehow. Well, all this was 5 years ago. He's been single ever since, and I'm in the middle of planning a wedding again. This time, my fiancé is involved in every step of the process. He's talked to bakeries and seen more possible venues than I have. He tells me he can't wait to be my husband, and watching him practice his new signature does certain things to my heart. I've never regretted calling off the other wedding, because this is how getting married should be like. I think this just nearly happened to me. Or not, it's very confusing. My partner and I have been together 5 years. During this time, we talked about getting married, and actually he did something amazing one day which made me realize my search was over. So I jumped the starting pistol a bit and I asked him if he'd be up for marrying one day, and he said yes. Other times we've talked about it, he's always said it's on the cards. I don't want to nag the poor guy, but after 4 or 5 years, you do get to wondering. I never knew there was a problem. Well, there is a problem. It seems he doesn't remember any of these conversations. He doesn't believe in marriage, and he's never believed in marriage apparently, and I don't know. I just felt something go snap in my heart. So I love him, and I stay, but I cry every other night. I don't know why marriage is important to me, but it just is. It always has been. He's always known this about me too. I try not to let him know because it just causes arguments. Once when it got too much, I tried to leave, but he does this emotional blackmail thing where he says he's going to leave his very decent job and just go work in a war zone, and phones up his family, all sorts of crap. So I can't leave. I guess you can get jilted at the altar without actually being near one. Gaslighting and manipulation. Yeah, you should get out while you can. It may end up being me unless I can deal with some issues before that. You see, I just don't love my fiancé anymore. But he's told me on numerous occasions, including after cheating on me, that if I left him, he'd probably not be alive anymore. I can't deal with that kind of pressure and guilt, and I just don't know what I'm supposed to do about it. I don't have anywhere else to go or the means to support myself right now, so I just feel trapped. My sister was left at the altar by my best mate, and I was best man. He met my sister through me, and they went out with each other for 2 years and were engaged for a year before the big day. We're in the church, at the front, waiting for the bride with about 15 minutes left to go. He says he needs the toilet and walks to the back of the church. A minute or so later, it hits me that the toilets aren't at the back of the church, and I start worrying, so I go out looking for him. He's not in the toilets, not around the church, and nowhere to be found. My best mate had legged it. We didn't see or hear from him for 3 days. His family for 2 days, and by then, he was just in Europe somewhere, staying with a friend. That's where he's been ever since for 3 years now. He's never made any effort to explain, even to my sister. Wow, top bloke. I need to go to the toilet must be the weakest excuse we've heard so far. And unlike the majority of these other situations, there was never any sequel to that statement or explanation to everyone else whose time and trust you wasted. Maybe self-imposed shameful exile is what he deserves until he treats other people better. I have a friend who went through with a wedding but left about 6 weeks later. She danced with her current husband at her first wedding more than her first husband. She implied once that I should have just talked her out of the wedding, but she was already legally married to the guy and would have probably lost a lot of money backing out of the big wedding at the last minute, so why not give it a shot? I wasn't aware of the extent of the issues they were having either. Also, why was it your responsibility to talk her out of it? Isn't she an adult who should be able to decide on her own if she wants to get married or not? I very much doubt this is a common occurrence. If I wasn't sure, I would back out way before getting the dress and all the expensive crap. However, I have a cousin who basically did it, sort of like 3 times even. The first time, guy number 1, everything was ready and they'd had the bridal shower and stuff, but she was talking to aunts and family members. Realized her guy was kind of into a lot of naughty movies and stuff and broke it off before the wedding. She kept all the presents. Second time, guy number 2, they got engaged, broke it off, don't really remember why at all. And third time, same as guy number 1. Absolutely no idea, because really I was just fed up at this point with even caring. At this point though, I realize I should have a lot more sympathy for her, because that seems to indicate actual problems that must be rather distressing for her. This woman who used to come and visit my parents when I was younger was left at the altar. She was one of those cases where you'll say karma got to her. This woman is a reason for so many divorces herself. She and her family members meddle in everyone's business. For example, if you have a fiancé, her and her cousins will make sure your fiancé dumps you by telling him about made-up lies. When she was left at the altar, it was an aha moment for everyone. You know, one of those come-to-Jesus moments. But she got married to another guy a year after that. Her cousin also tried to be a bride at another woman's wedding. Her cousin tried to be a what now? Can you elaborate on that? Unfortunately, there are no further answers. My dad actually jilted his fiancée. You see, my dad was fairly young and was arranged to marry someone that was supposed to be the most beautiful girl in the area. He worked on offshore rigs, so he didn't have any contact with the girl, with the exception of a few photos and a couple of long-distance phone calls, which were really expensive. When he got home, she came to visit and he realized that she was far heavier than what they'd shown in the pictures. When he pointed this out, nobody else seemed to think it was a big deal, but my dad was pretty unhappy. He went as far as talking to the girl and the girl's parents, asking them to respectfully call it off. But they were adamant about going through with the wedding. It was during that conversation that the family admitted that the girl was illiterate. She wasn't even interested in school, so they took her out early and sent her to study tailoring instead. She had not even learned how to handle money or read or write. My dad didn't want to embarrass the girl or her family, so he didn't tell anyone about what he'd learned. Everyone had assumed that she'd had a college-level education, but she actually went to a vocational school that was housed in the college building. A few nights before the wedding, my father's cousin, a friend, and his younger brother helped him escape. Another person volunteered to marry the girl, so she still got married on the day. So it all went about as well as it could have, I guess? I wasn't sure that I wanted to marry Sophie. I was confused. We went on vacation and I was initially planning on proposing to her. I'd bought a ring and everything. After much thought, I'd decided not to go through with the proposal, but while I was out of the hotel room, she found the ring. I didn't have the heart to explain that I'd changed my mind. After that, I just kind of went through the motions. On our wedding day, I ended up hiding in the upper gallery of the church with my best man and roommate, Jeremy. We just kind of hid up there while everyone looked for us until eventually he had to pee and we got discovered. Sophie was devastated and I think I'm just going to end up living with Jeremy forever now. This might just be how it's meant to be. Me and Jeremy living together until one of us dies or we just F each other. This happened to a previous work colleague. I'd been working with him as a cleaner for 4 years and he had been with his then partner for a while. Everything seemed hunky-dory and soon enough he proposed to her and she accepted. Everything seemed to be progressing smoothly and I even went to his stag do, which is to this day the most drunk I've ever been in my life. We had it at this farmhouse where the only rule was don't break anything, the house isn't mine. I ended up being the only person who did break something, and it was the entire stair banister. But I digress. As the wedding day approaches, I arrive at work to find out from my boss that the wedding has been called off. Apparently, his fiancée was a lesbian and had been cheating on him for quite a while. What I never understood was how she could accept the proposal. Surely when he was down on one knee, that would have been the ideal time to express how you really feel. Similar but relevant, one of my exes asked me if I wanted to get married after about 3 weeks of knowing her. I spent the next month or so trying to figure out a good way to dump her because that set off my crazy alarm and I didn't want to break her. Survivors. What does it feel like to take a bullet? I used to live in a really crappy part of Chicago. One night, coming home from work, I got mugged. It wasn't my first time. The guy asked for my wallet and phone. I gave them up without hesitation. Then he pointed his piece at me and pulled the trigger. Shot me in the chest. Blacked out immediately and had some sharp pains when I woke up in the hospital. Caught the guy a few months later when he shot and ended an old man whose house he'd broken into. I got shot in the side by a negligent discharge at the range. It was a complete accident. The guy even came to the hospital and paid all of the fees. Anyways, the bullet entered my left side and exited about 3 inches to the right. So it wasn't deep, it just hit tissue. It stung for a bit and then adrenaline kicked in and I rushed for the quick clot I keep in my center console. It made the stinging worse, but was able to stop the bleeding while waiting for the EMTs. Some people are asking, why quick clot? That's bad for you. For how much it was bleeding for not hitting a blood vessel and the lack of information I had, being the situation I was in, it was my go-to. I know that it's meant to be a last resort, but I'm sure that if you had it, you would panic and use it too if you were shot. I caught one in the face one time by a thug attempting to rob me in 2008. My son, who was 7 at the time, and I were coming home late from visiting family. I let him out of the car at our front door so that he could go inside and use the bathroom, and I was about to drive around back to park the car when I noticed an old junker car idling in the street at the entrance to our driveway. I knew something wasn't right. I parked the car and ran up to catch my son at the front door. As I got there, a man with a weapon pointed at us came up from the side of our house. He told me to show me the money, but I was speechless. My son was frantically trying to open the door, and my husband inside heard the commotion and came out. As soon as he saw what was happening, he pushed open our heavy iron door into the guy, knocking him backwards. The guy fired, we believe at my husband, but hitting me in the face as he ran off. Luckily, our neighbor had already called the cops, and they arrived quickly. I didn't even realize I'd been shot in the face because the only real pain I felt was from the exit wound behind my ear. It was an excruciating, burning sensation, but what I remember most was the horrifying feeling of the hot blood pouring out of my mouth and down my back. I absolutely thought I was going to die, but I never actually lost consciousness until I went into surgery at the hospital. Lots of blood loss and long recovery, but no residual physical damage, really. The scar on my nose is hardly noticeable now, and the scar behind my ear stays covered by my hair most of the time, so I don't really think about it. Also, I was pregnant at the time all of this happened, and my second son was born a few months later perfectly healthy. Pretty crazy stuff. Thank you. And the scumbag moron might have never been caught, but he was bragging to some people in jail, where he got picked up for doing something similar to another woman a few weeks later, about how hard he was because he shot some white B-word in front of her kid. Oof, I knew that there'd be some really hardened and awful people here, but bragging that you shot down a mother in front of her child is just such an absolutely cartoonish level of evil that I don't think exists outside of complete psychopaths or people so terrified of their surroundings that they feel like that reputation might protect them. Horrifying. A stray round from a drive-by in my area hit me to the left of my navel while I was changing a light bulb. Felt like someone poked me really hard, and then it burned like all hell. I walked to the bathroom and looked at it in the mirror. Being a firearm enthusiast and a nurse, I immediately knew what it was and called 911. It didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. That was until I bent over to get the first aid kit from under my sink. The pain was a stabbing, burning pain, and I guess I tore something because blood started pouring out. Managed to stop the bleeding and wait for the paramedics. A friend of mine was in Vietnam and served as a medic. He was in one of the largest battles of the war when he got shot. Somewhere in the jungle, and there were several hundred combatants involved. He was rushing all over the place in between trees, trying to bandage guys up and handing out morphine. As he was tending to one guy, a Viet Cong fighter popped up, literally right in front of him, and shot him in the forehead. He said he didn't even feel it happen. He grabbed the weapon of the soldier he was helping and shot the Viet Cong guy in the chest, killing him. I'm guessing the Viet Cong was a little slow to fire again. Most people would be a little shocked to see a guy with a quarter of his skull blown away still moving. He said a few seconds later, after the massive adrenaline rush began to wear off, his head felt like it was on fire, and then he passed out from the pain, blood loss, and the fact that his brain was exposed to the air. Remarkably, he suffered very little permanent brain damage, and today he has a really cool action hero star and war story to boot. If they ever put a scene like this in a movie, it'd get laughed out of the theater for being unrealistic. I got shot in the leg while working once. I was a bounty hunter at the time. And to be quite honest, I didn't feel it initially. Aside from unnatural pressure, I didn't even know I'd been hit. After my adrenaline died down, it was a burning, throbbing pain. I didn't enjoy it, but it wasn't going to kill me. Getting it removed wasn't that bad either. Morphine is one hell of a med. Now, being stabbed is the single most painful experience I've ever had. Not fun. I was hit 2 times in the back and once in the arm in Afghanistan. I was only conscious for about 7 minutes, if that. I felt pain pretty much the entire time I was awake. But as the minutes passed, it was starting to go away and I kept falling asleep or passing out. Just kept putting my head down and closing my eyes because it felt so good. It's really hard to describe the pain. I felt frozen on the ground and couldn't move or breathe well at all. It felt like my guts had been ripped apart and pulled out of my body. I was thinking for sure I was going to die. The pain, the blood, and the screaming around me. I was also sure the guy was going to finish me off, like walk up to me and dome me later. I found out he actually did walk over me but was distracted by others firing at him. Here is basically what my mind was going through. Minute 1 to 2, holy crap, I've been freaking shot. Help me, I don't want to die. I was trying to scream during this whole time. Then minutes 2 to 4, please, if there's a God, let me be accepted into heaven. I didn't want to just die, to become nothing and go into blackness as I was seeing. It really scared me into wanting there to be an afterlife. Minutes 4 through 6, I just want to go to sleep and end this. I've accepted my death. My family, my friends, I love them so much. Minute 4 to 6 was happening while I was going in and out of consciousness, by the way. My squad leader was slapping my face, trying to keep me up. He's also the one that mainly took down my assailant. They then picked me up and ran with me somewhere, and my last memory was hearing a rotor of a Black Hawk. Next thing I knew, I woke up at Walter Reed a week later, confused as heck, thinking I was captured. Yep, I'm in the US Army and I was shot by an Afghan National Army soldier on the FOB we share with them. I lost a very good friend that day as well, who I watched get shot right in front of my eyes, before I was then hit myself. There's a few articles of the incident if anyone cares to read. In short, got hit, it hurt like a witch, and I thought I was dead for sure. Somehow lived to tell the story. It's very disorganized because when I talk about it, I just seem to remember everything at once. Well, it's happened to me on 3 separate occasions, and all 3 felt different. The first time, I was hit in the back of the arm with a small caliber weapon, a .25 ACP. That was when I was a teenager. It burned like holy hell, but more so, the psychological shock made me become weak and lose all coordination. The second time was a shotty blast to the small of my back, butt, and thighs, with a mixture of birdshot and rock salt from a decent distance away. I didn't notice at first, it was like a big push. The problem is that birdshot and rock salt are both too small of a particulate to be removed. You have to wait until the salt dissolves, and the birdshot has to work its own way out of your flesh like little pimples that spit metal when you pop them. So that sucked. The last time was a .45 to the face. I only caught the jacket and some other shrapnel, but holy heck did it do a number on my mouth. I still have a hard time saying F's or P's correctly anymore because of the damage and the shrapnel left behind in my lower lip. That one felt like being punched in the face by a big, fat bouncer. All in all, I think being stabbed hurts worse. I'd rather be shot if I had the choice. Pro tip for walking through a sketchy neighborhood: take an empty cup, like the one you'd get for fountain drinks, and put your phone and wallet in there. Then put a straw through the lid. Put something small like a $10 bill in your pocket. In the event you get mugged, you run your pockets and give them the $10, and chances are they pay no attention to your stupid soda. It hurts like a motherfricker, especially when you're running, as said by my dad. He also said that even with a bulletproof vest, it still frickin' hurts. Thank you, Bulletproof Vest, for saving my dad. Yep, all you're really doing there is spreading the force over a wider area, although I guess that's a very silly use of the word only, isn't it? Only saving your life is a very big only. But yes, if the vest works, you're basically choosing to take a sledgehammer hit instead of, well, a bullet. And that is the right choice. I got an in and out through the shoulder in Afghanistan. It didn't really hurt because I just got hit by an RPG shrapnel blast as well. For me, anyway, I didn't really think I was going to die. I thought I'd lost my leg, and for some reason that freaked me out way more. I didn't really think about it much after I realized I hadn't lost it. I mean, pain-wise. A lot of other guys were hit a lot worse or dead, so I guess my head was occupied. That crap just stopped working, though. I mean my right leg and left wrist. I don't really remember pain at the time, But I mean 7 or 8 guys had just lost their lives at the OP, so getting hit again was a very real possibility. Me and another guy managed to crawl out, though, after another group came up to reinforce, and I hopped to a medevac with some help. It frickin' hurt like heck later on though, but I had meds by that point. Unfortunately, if you want to get out of the hospital, you've got to be off the IV meds, so I did stop those ASAP. So I mean it frickin' hurt, but perks and plenty of booze and it knocked that crap right out until the next morning. So this was all sort of relevant, I guess. I don't know if that helps you or anything. In short, shot through the shoulder, RPG shrapnel to the right calf, left thigh, and my left wrist and arm. Didn't hurt at the time, ached like heck afterwards, but nothing opiates and liquor couldn't fix. Okay, so I kind of glossed over it lightheartedly on purpose because it can get really sad really quick. But please, do not drink and take opiates. It was a really dumb thing to do. We lose quite a few guys to that stuff. Please don't be a moron like me. And whether it's a beer, a thanks for your service, or a welcome home, it truly means the world to guys like me. I don't know who's a D-bag enough to get annoyed about how you thank them, but the fact that people care about us is more than enough thanks for me. If there's anything I'd ask, I'd just say be patient with the combat vets in your life. A lot of us are a little disturbed or confused, or just plain scared or weirded out about civilian life. Not infinitely patient, though. We do need a kick in the butt as much as the next guy sometimes, too. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I was also shot in an attempted mugging in Chicago North Side at Rogers Park. My mistake was jogging late at night through the alleys to avoid foot traffic on the sidewalks near the red line. 2 guys, thugs, walking opposite of me, stopped me dead in my tracks, pulled out a concealed gat and asked for my iPod. And of course, my thoughts at the time were, you're not taking my music because then I won't have anything to listen to at work the next day. And that was my honest thought. Having watched the Discovery Channel's The Science of Fighting, I, in an instant, moved to disarm the gat-toting guy by snatching it from his loose grip. But of course that didn't work. I think he fired off a round in an attempt to protect himself from me taking his weapon. Anyway, shot fired, I saw the pop, felt the energy, the heat, and started running away in the opposite direction in like a zigzag, like I used to do in the basketball drills. All the while, the other guy did nothing. Nobody chased me. I ran to the end of the alley to safety and called 911 as soon as I ran back to my apartment. CPD and medics arrived within 3 to 4 minutes, disrobed me, found an entrance wound and no exit wound. Adrenaline wore off, and yes, it burns all around the affected areas. Anyway, I kept the bullet inside me since it was a more complicated thing to remove. It was a .22. And no, it doesn't trip the airport metal detectors. Got shot. First thought, did that hit me? Doesn't feel like it. Try to move. Holy crap, it hit me. Does it hurt? Well, blood is gushing out. I was very confused, as you can tell. Oddly, it didn't hurt at all until the next day. The doctor gave me plenty of pain meds to help me sleep, so when I jumped out of bed, I was given a harsh reminder that I was very much injured. I was robbed and shot on August 19th of 2006. I was put on my knees and shot in the back of the head, execution style. The bullet, a .40, entered my head directly beneath and behind my right ear and exited about 2 inches below my Adam's apple. I fell forward, face first. I didn't feel myself hit the ground. Retrospectively, I guess I was in shock. But at the time, it was slow and painless, like it is in the movies. It was quiet, too. Loud first, big bang, like a firework right behind my head, and then silence. I didn't know what had happened, but I was still conscious. I recall the whole thing. Fortunately, I felt the front door slam away as the robbers ran out. They hadn't been prepared to have to murder someone that day. Things had gone wrong for all of us. The door was heavy. It was a vibration in my otherwise distant world. I was looking ahead, across the plain on my white carpet. Things were diagonal. Somehow I registered it was wrong, but I didn't mind. It was only when I saw my blood on the white carpet that I realized something was up. It was red. My carpet's white. I knew there was cleaning to do. I thought to myself, oh, that's bad. That doesn't belong there. And then I began to recall what had led up to it. Being marched around my home for the valuables, them asking me if I had a rope, the hammer I grabbed and swung unsuccessfully before I heard the firework. Then I knew what had happened. It's hard for me to say what it felt like because I didn't feel much until I was in the hospital. But I do recall the way it burned at first. Then I was just wet and cold and getting colder quickly. I called 911 and told them I'd been hit and thought it was in the head. I tell the story sometimes comically, but in truth, I had to listen to the call for testimony. I was meek, desperate, gargling on my own fluids. It was my worst moment, recorded for posterity's sake. What does it feel like? It felt like a cut. A deep, white cut. It felt like all of my memories and my personality and what I was or would be were draining out of a hole I couldn't plug. Although I can't say how it feels to be shot, I'll say this. Having a weapon point blank in your face when you're powerless to do a thing is a terror that sticks out to you. The comments here have varying reactions to the actual wound, but the psychological reaction in my particular experience is worse than any physical pain I've incurred. My friend has been hit once or twice by irresponsible, bad-aiming grandparents while dove hunting. He was less than 200 yards away, and they were shotties. It's funny to see his shorts with bird-shot holes in them. Wait. People hunt doves? Like, I know that people hunt ducks and geese and edible things, and I could fully get behind a massive pigeon shooting event because God knows I'd love to see less of those things. But why would you specifically go out of your way to shoot those relatively benign symbols of peace? I had a really awful human being as a boyfriend when I was a teen. One night he'd been playing poker with his buddies and drinking. I'd been told to lay in bed and just wait, which is where I was always told to be when I was to be at his beck and call, but also out of the way. After about 4 or 5 hours of him and his buddies playing poker and drinking, he called for me to come out and sit with him. I did. When I got there, his one friend made a comment like, how the heck did you get your B-word to be so obedient? And my boyfriend replied, she knows where she stands. Now, one of my boyfriend's friends, we'll call him Joe from now on, had his suspicions about my boyfriend, who will be Alex from now on. Joe had asked me a few times if I was okay, but I'd never said anything because I was too scared and alone. At this point, Alex had made me cut contact with all of my family, friends, and school, everything. So, while the boys kept playing and drinking, Alex told me to sit on his lap to give him good luck. Alex continued to lose, and Joe could see that I was getting nervous. I knew it would be a worse night for me if Alex lost all of his money. So Joe, thinking he was helping, started trying to cheat to make Alex win. This is where I get fuzzy on the details because I've blocked out a lot of it by now. Alex figured that Joe was cheating to lose, and he didn't like that. So he was asking Joe why. Joe said he must have had a rough streak or something, and Alex didn't believe him. So he started getting aggressive towards Joe. I, stupidly, made a comment like, leave him alone. Maybe he's just bad at poker. That made Alex feel like maybe there was a reason that I was standing up for Joe, and he started berating me that I was cheating on him with Joe, and if I was so in love with him, why didn't I just go home with him tonight? There was a slap, which was the first time he'd ever hit me in front of people, and Joe grabbed me and said it was time to go. Alex got up and took a swing at Joe. They had a bit of a scuffle while the other 3 guys tried to calm everyone down. Joe grabbed my hand and started to take me up the stairs and out of the house. Alex was yelling after me, telling me that I was a good-for-nothing working girl and how Joe would see how promiscuous I was and I wasn't to come crawling back to him when I effed up with Joe. As Joe and I were getting into his car, Alex came running out of his house, pointing a weapon at Joe. Joe said something like, Alex, just calm down, I'm going to take her to my place so everyone can take a breather and we'll figure it out later. Alex then turned his weapon on me instead and said something like, it's not your fault, Joe, it's hers. Joe tried to tackle Alex, but the trigger had been pulled. Luckily, Joe had pushed his arm just enough that the bullet hit my ear and didn't do too much damage. I have a tiny bit of hearing loss. My ear had to be reconstructed, but I did make it out alive. Sorry for the huge long story, it's been a long time since I told it. And for those wondering, no, I didn't get out of there after that. This is the part that's the most embarrassing, and I think only another battered woman would understand it. I went back to him after a week at Joe's, although I did eventually leave. I was shot in the shoulder and clavicle area by a .45. At first, I felt and heard nothing. It was almost like watching a dream. Then, I felt very hot, and the wound itself felt like, well, I don't know, like a searing hot piece of metal was driven through flesh and bone. The bullet didn't go all the way through my bone, by the way, it penetrated and got stuck in. I didn't fall down or anything. I stayed on my feet and walked through the house and to the front door after calling 911. I don't know how long it took them to get there, but it felt like they were instantly there since time felt really insubstantial. I walked to the ambulance and they put me on a stretcher where I was given meds and passed out. Shot myself in the foot with a .17 air rifle when I was a child. It hurt so very much. I was on the verge of tears. My parents would have taken it away if I'd told them the truth. The rifle was fairly new, so it went right through the foot and out the rubber sole and into the buffalo grass in front of the garden. It was very dear to me at the time, not so much the rabbits and other introduced species. Hobbling over to the workshop, I found a roofing nail and poked it through slowly, which hurt even more so than the slug. The joy in seeing the point of it peek out between my laces was only surpassed during my first dose of unprotected whoopee years later. It worked, however. My mum and dad still have no idea that I shot myself in the foot with my birthday present. I got shot through my right leg years ago when I was doing gang stuff. Bullet hit in the back of my leg just below my knee, right on the bend, and it lodged in my leg. I had a lot of adrenaline going, so I didn't really feel pain. My brain just pushed it to the side. I felt something impact me, and it felt weird, but it didn't really click until the shooting had stopped. Having it removed sucked though, that I definitely felt. What is the nastiest thing you've done to a customer's order at a restaurant? I worked at a popular fast food chain in my younger years. It was my first time with closing shift, and we were all doing our part to clean and prep the store. I see this lady with a mop and bucket come out of the back, slop it on the griddle, and start just mopping it. I was appalled. I went back and told the manager, and she tells me, well, that's the quickest way to clean it, and then scolded me for worrying about things that didn't concern me. I quit that job the next day and called the district office and told them what had happened. That location closed down not long after. But the franchise still exists. I mean, there's such a thing as a grill mop, but it's absolutely distinct from a floor mop. You don't confuse the two. I knew a guy that peed in a bucket of pickles. He would never have been caught if he didn't talk about it. There were other things going on at that McDonald's that helped ruin the reputation. It was also competing with another well-managed restaurant in a town that never really had room for both of them. The guy I'm talking about was just one of the most immature teens I've ever known. The funny thing is that he's married to my sister now and has a much better job than me. He slowly transformed into a responsible adult after having a child. The worst thing I did was to this one guy that I already didn't like, and he was being kind of a butthole, so I overcooked his eggs. Poured a whole tray of drinks over a guest. Twice. International trade fair with students as waiters. First time was an accident. Second time, she was so nervous she was practically shaking and spilled the drinks again on the very same guy. I saw a waiter pour an orange juice, take a big swig with his lips on the rim, top it up and then take it to the table. In college, I worked for a well-known pizza place. One of our waitstaff came to collect a pepperoni pizza and nabbed a piece of the pepperoni off the top before taking it out. He gets to the table and everyone is staring at him in stunned silence. There's a very fine string of cheese going from the pizza to his mouth. I had a buddy at McDonald's, a real chaotic type, who every once in a while would say, "Oh hey, guess what time it is? It's pickle surprise," and put a whole handful of pickles on a random cheeseburger. I mean, personally, I think your definition of nasty is off, as I'd probably be fine with that. I'd probably only have to pick a few out, to be honest. Love me a lot of pickles. Also, I would not be surprised if we were about to get many, many more stories from the Golden Arches. Case in point. I worked at McDonald's in high school, and I had a buddy who was basically like the pickle guy. The best one I remember was a girl we knew who ordered a burger with no onions. He took her burger patty, carefully carved it out so it became a burger ring, put that on the bun, and filled the entire center with onions. It was maybe 10% burger, 90% onion, but it looked totally normal from the outside. He never would have done it to a stranger, but friends were fair game. I also went through and ordered a burger one time, and he handed me the bag with what I thought was an evil grin. Turns out he'd put 9 patties on it. My other buddy who ordered 2 burgers got one with 4 patties and one with 5. Nastiest thing I've ever done? Well, I gave them what they ordered. We were a pizza/Italian/bar restaurant. Our menu was ludicrously large, and essentially anything that was on the menu that could go on a pizza was listed as a topping. Probably 40 to 50 topping choices. I'd get asked pretty often for a pizza with everything on it. I had a usual joke or two to find out what they really wanted. Typically a deluxe, but then they'd want no black olives or whatever. No big deal. Until the butthole came in that ordered, quote, everything, and then proceeded to ask if I was retarded when I questioned him. See, my sister is disabled, so I didn't appreciate his tact. I told my boss about it, and he smiled and said, "Get him a pizza with everything then." Bought it out and gave it to him. He flipped out and demanded the manager, of course. My manager had my back and gave the guy his bill, which at $2 a topping was well over a $100 pizza. The guy refused to pay. Cops got called, yada yada yada. I hope he enjoyed his pizza with clams, pineapple, buffalo chicken, broccoli, anchovies, green olives, cream cheese, cauliflower, jalapenos, and shrimp. Worked at a 50s-style diner. I was prepping the chicken breasts for our burgers and dropped a tray of 50 and they slid right under the grill. Easily the dirtiest place in the whole restaurant. My boss saw and had me pick them all up, rinse them with water, re-season them and stick them back in the fridge. Yeah, I stopped eating there when I wasn't working after that day. At my last restaurant, my co-worker would make very ugly sundaes for customers who were rude. For particularly nice customers, she'd painstakingly recreate the sundaes in the menu pictures and give them extra cream and sprinkles. Yeah, pretty much this. I'll make what you order, but I won't put any love into it. If you're a decent human, I'll try to make you the best version of what you order. I should say that tampering with food is not very common. I've been in the business a long time, and I've only worked with one girl who spat in someone's food. Another server saw her, and she got reported and fired immediately. The only other thing that sometimes happens is when people get cocky and ask for extremely spicy food. The kitchen staff turn into evil geniuses then. A guy once asked me for wings so spicy that they'd give a woman a miscarriage. I relayed those lovely instructions to the kitchen, and I don't know what they did, but the sauce was burning my nose and making my eyes water just for carrying it out. He was not able to finish his wings. My dad started going to his neighborhood pub frequently for wing nights, and he'd ask for wings as hot as you can make them. Went on for quite a while, with them just dousing them with as much Frank Reds as you could possibly fit on them, because that's all they had for hot wings. Well, I guess eventually the cook got sick of being asked for as hot as you can make them and acquired some special ingredients. Next time my dad asked for as hot as you can make them, he got a dozen wings spicy enough to strip paint off the space shuttle. My dad went back to just asking for plain hot wings or extra hot from then on. One time we had a woman call back because her rotisserie chicken was, quote, burnt. I explained it's just charred because of the way it's cooked. She wasn't having that, so we agreed to get her a new one. 10 minutes after her husband left, she called back even more angry, saying this one was worse. We told her to send her husband back again for a new one. The manager and I went back, with gloves on, and scraped off all the burnt parts. And I crap you not, 10 minutes after he leaves, she calls again, but this time her rice didn't have any craisins on it. So once again, I told her to send him back. I dumped so many frickin' craisins on that rice, I think she got the point, and we never heard from or saw them again. I know it's not super gross, but it's pretty rare to see someone maliciously F with someone's food. I've seen cooks use the 5-second rule when dropping food or not washing hands, but that's about it in my 7 years in the industry. Some Indian guys came in one time and asked for us to make their food as spicy as possible. I told them that's going to be extremely spicy and wanted to make sure they knew what they were asking for. They went on a long rant about how Indian restaurants are the only places that actually know what spicy is, and anything we bring out isn't going to be close to how spicy they like their food. So I had the owner come over to tell them that we'll try our best, but there won't be any refund on this food if it's too spicy. So we made them chicken fried rice with Trinidad scorpion peppers. After 2 bites and about 10 glasses of soy milk later, they ordered something else. I worked in a very well-known fast food chain for a while. My favorite example of this actually involved nothing. The person who bought the food had been rude to staff on multiple occasions. The person serving went to get their food, popped around the corner in a noticeable way, then returned, having done nothing. He gave the food to him with a huge grin on his face and said, "Enjoy." He then watched the person throw it in the bin when he went outside. I worked for Applebee's for 7 years, and not until my last year did I witness this act. One of the cooks would drop down to 1 pair of tongs for the grill station for closing. He used the same tongs for raw chicken, beef, seafood, and cooked food. He would swish the tongs in his sanitizing solution that looked like soup since he never changed it, and claimed that it was good after that. I called him out on that, and he told me that he never told me how to cook, so I should just let him be. I told management too, and it was swept under the rug like everything else. I quit shortly after, but that was the only time I witnessed something frickin' disgusting like that. That sounds like a gnarly brine, alright. There are 2 sorts of people in these chain restaurants, those who care way too much about rules and those who do literally just enough to not get fired. And it sounds like the second guy had worked out exactly where that line was with his lazy managers. My stepmom was super rude to a server, kept sending her chicken wings back and complaining. The last time the wings came out, the whole kitchen staff seemed to pile out and look at her. She refused to eat the wings and yelled at the server some more. It was so embarrassing. I would have left. I once had a customer have a complete temper tantrum, and her boyfriend, I assume, just got up and left her there. Interestingly enough, if we're going to dinner with her, my husband or I will bring cash so that we can do just that. I felt so badly for the server and the kitchen staff. Now, I carry enough money to be able to drop it on the table to pay for our meal and tip the server and apologize on the way out. My tolerance for people being rude or mean to others has gotten quite low. Worked in a fast food pizza joint. Nothing without consent of the customer happened, but customers did ask for some weird, nasty stuff. One time, a customer asked for extra chili and emphasized a lot. So of course, we put like a lot on it. Another person wanted chicken legs and wanted them extra crisp. He kept sending them back until it was pretty much burnt, which is when he found it perfect. The worst one, though, was a woman asking to put her pasta in a blender because she had just gotten prosthetics and couldn't properly eat. It looked disgusting. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. This isn't really bad, but a lot of the times when people send their food back and there's just clearly nothing wrong with it, and the chefs will just rearrange the food on the plate, wait a minute or two, and then send it out to the table. The funniest part is when the customer then says it's better. I had a crap manager tell me I had to mop the floor again after I'd just done it perfectly. So I just waited 10 minutes and told him I'd done it. He comes out and says, "See, that wasn't so hard, was it?" It really wasn't, since I did jack all. I have not worked in a restaurant in over 15 years. I never messed with anyone's food because that is assault. What I used to do to snotty Karen types is give them a senior discount and announce to the table when I dropped the check that I remembered to add said discount. I mean, that's funny because if they complain, that's going to cost them money. They wanted extra mayo, so I maliciously complied by drenching it. The lady thought I'd forget her fake $10 prayer tip the last time she was here. I worked at McDonald's in high school and college, and this kind of malicious compliance was the worst we ever did. Our worst was a guy who wanted extra pickles on his quarter pounder. We covered that thing. He comes back and says, "That's not extra." Okay, so he slapped a big frickin' handful of pickles on the new one, like almost couldn't wrap the thing. It was 80% pickles. He started to get huffy, but the manager goes, "Well, we didn't want to shortchange you this time and figured it was better to give you too many, and you could pick them off than too few." And then he stormed out. Not a restaurant, but the prepared food section of a highly regarded grocery store. Someone forgot to toss the old potato salad that was on its 4th day. That stuff needs to be thrown out at the end of the 3rd day. We were supposed to keep track of this stuff religiously. The manager told my coworker to just mix it in with the brand new stuff, so people were eventually being given 6-day-old potato salad. I guess worse things could have happened, but I'm squeamish about food, so it really bothered me. The most memorable one was once when a customer made a waitress cry complaining about their food and sent it back. The chef farted on the remake, and it got a lot of laughs. More common is if a customer is a butthole, when they order dessert, you find the smallest slice of cheesecake you can. Worked in a deli for a few years. I never tampered with anyone's food, but if you were a jerk, I guaranteed your bread was over-toasted, the lettuce on your sandwich was wilted, the tomato was the butt end with the hole from us removing the core, your onions were little pieces, the meat was the smallest of the portions, and so on and so forth. I wouldn't tamper with someone's food, but I damn well wasn't making them a good sandwich. And all of that goes the exact opposite way with the customers I liked. Always gave them the best product, to the point that they'd wait for me to help them. I used to work at a local pizza restaurant in a town known for its pizza. The cook always carried around a dirty, stained brown rag he'd used to wipe his hands and sweat off his face and blow his nose into. On multiple occasions, I've seen him let the rag touch the pizza while he was preparing it. When I was a pizza delivery driver, when habitual non-tippers ordered, I wouldn't cut their pizza all the way through. I worked in a movie theater. We got people who complained all about how the concession lines were so long, their movie's about to start, blah blah blah, all before they even placed their order. So now everyone else has to wait longer. You can bet I didn't butter the middle of their popcorn, just the top. And I filled their soda cup all the way up with ice before putting the soda in. Just keeping it speedy. I worked at a pizzeria joint in high school. The owners of the pizza place also had a woodworking business on the side, and they always gave this one butthole, nasty prick worker from that business 75% off any time he came into the pizza store. That's fine, no problem. However, he'd always come in at like 9:55 p.m. when we closed at 10, without fail right when we got done cleaning everything. This would happen 2 to 3 times during the week. He knew exactly what he was doing because he was always a massive prick just like that. And it was always a massive order, maybe a burger, some broasted chicken, and a pizza, so everything got dirty. To top it off, he'd sit there and eat the burger and some chicken and take the pizza home. That means we had to wait for him to get done and wait on him as we had a strict nobody closes alone policy. So 2 of the 3 would be stuck there. And we couldn't close early or lock the doors because he saw the owners every day from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. at the woodworking business and he'd 100% rat us out. After a couple of months of this, the store manager finally got sick of it, took the buns, put them down his crotch and let them sit there for a few minutes until his burger was done. I worked in restaurants for 10 plus years and never saw anybody intentionally messing with a customer's food. Honestly, it's just not that common in my experience. Same. Been in the business my whole life. Saw something deliberate only one time? There are plenty of sanitary issues in almost every restaurant, don't get me wrong. Some worse than others. But it's very rare for someone to deliberately mess with your food. Cross and physical contamination and temperature issues are a much bigger issue. Yeah, the issue that most people just aren't that awful to their customers, no matter how awful their customers are to them, has been a real problem writing this video. Turns out that most people in hospo are too decent or need the jobs too much to actually go out of their way to do something really entertaining. I'll try and find a few more of the golden ones before we finish up here. Worked at a movie theater for a while. Our pizzas came frozen in a large bag of many pizzas, so the contents sometimes got shifted around during shipping. One guy was acting like it was the end of the world because he got there late, hungry, and had to wait in line. He ordered a pepperoni pizza, so my coworker went to the freezer, pulled out a pizza with 1 slice of pepperoni on it, and tossed that sucker into the oven. The guy eventually got a refund, but that must have felt good just to see the reaction from him. When I bartended, the worst thing I ever did to an order was to pour a legal pour instead of being generous. The worst way I treated a customer was that once I refused to pick up the 2 dimes and a nickel he tried to tip me for his $14 drink, and when he said, "Hey, my man, this is for you," I replied with a terse, "Keep it, you clearly need that money more than I do. People don't mess with your food or drink, because that's our job, we take pride in it, but if you tee us off, we'll just refuse to serve you." There were only 3 things I'd ever do as a waitress: stingy ice cream if your kids were brats, bigger serve if they were well behaved. One table were extremely racist to my colleague, so I was given their table and they were so nice to me. So then I overcooked their free brownie so it was burnt in some spots, and put too much chocolate topping on their brownie so it was sickly sweet and very hard to eat. If they'd complained, I wouldn't have pled ignorant about burning it, and I would have said I was being nice with the extra topping. There's this lady and her daughter that come into my restaurant. Every time I've served them, they make you run. "We need more ranch. I want another margarita, extra ketchup," etc., etc. My favorite was the time when I asked if they wanted ranch with their wings. "Nope." And then literally as soon as I brought out the wings, "Oh, and we need ranch." And they never tip. Or if they do, it's insultingly low. Like once the tab was $48.50 and they gave me $50, and I brought the change back and the daughter, who's in her mid-20s, smirks and says, "Oh no, that's for you, sweetie." I left it there and walked away without a word. Now, whenever they come in, they just take forever to get served. And their margaritas that they drink like water, mostly because they may as well be, they're probably about half strength compared to what everyone else that doesn't act like jerks towards the staff gets. Their food sits under the heat lamps getting stale for a while. The kitchen is aware of this and the reason for it, and they're on board since these witches send their food back all the time claiming it's wrong even though it was made exactly to order, and of course they always waited until it was more than half eaten to complain. I genuinely cannot stand them. The younger one always just smirks when she orders things like she thinks you're such a pleb for being a server. Back in college, I worked in a fast food kitchen. We would make crappy or rude customers' orders with hate instead of indifference. As we always said, the food shouldn't suffer because the person who ordered it was a C-word. One time I ordered a liter of cola and the kid working the register secretly poked a hole in the cup. If you behave like a butthole to baristas at Starbucks, you'll get decaf espresso shots in your latte or cappuccino or frappe or whatever. If you ordered tea, they will not shake it. This is the way. This isn't really that bad, but lots of restaurants are guilty of it. The little date or day or timestamps on stickers and wrappers and salads, look closely next time. If there's one stuck on top of the other, or if there's more than one mark on the wrapper, your food has probably expired. Sometimes this is done because the food actually is still good and it's a shame to waste it, but other times it's a lazy worker who doesn't want to make more food, or a greedy owner who doesn't want to lose 3 cents. The type of stickers and labels varies by restaurant. Some timestamps look like clocks, and some are a line of numbers 1 through 12, with a mark through the one where the item expires. For example, if your sandwich has a mark through the 11 and it's now 3, your sandwich expired 5 minutes ago, but honestly, it's probably still good. I work at Sonic. A lady complained, and there was a wire bread tie in her burger. That still bugs me. It was over 10 years ago. I worked at a golf course restaurant. One of my female coworkers had some crude crap said to her by one of the old golfers. Something along the lines of, "With a butt like that, you shouldn't be in the kitchen. You should be on the course serving us beers." Then he ordered a ham sandwich on the turn to the back 9. She licked the F out of that ham before putting it on the sandwich, then wrapped it in saran wrap, punched it, went out and handed it to him herself. I worked at a Taco Bell that used to be a combo Taco Bell and Pizza Hut, so it had this hood for the oven that was no longer there. One really tall guy used to rest his gloved hands up there between orders and then make food. Once, to prove a point, I wiped it down to show him how dirty it was. He said, "Great, now it's clean." Also, night shift would put dirty cardboard boxes on the fryer area to put the fried food to cool, so they could wash the tray. There was once a footprint on the box. I have more stories. Don't eat fast food at night. What are Reddit's greatest mysteries of all time? There was a guy on the legal advice Reddit who claimed that every time he stepped outside, whether the front or back door, his neighbor would honk their horn. He said it would happen every single time without fail, but not when anyone else in his household went out. He also said it was happening for several years. Everyone suggested he had a mental illness, which was a likely explanation, but I wish we got an update from that guy. There was an account called Is There Life After Lyme, as in Lyme disease. I discovered the account about a year ago, and I was fascinated reading these past comments and posts. It appears to belong to a woman who at first thought she had Lyme disease, but actually had a degenerative brain disease, whose husband left her for another woman and eventually gained custody of their child. A lot of us who followed believed that her LLMD essentially did this to her by insisting on giving her sketchy alternative medicine that seemed to be inducing frequent and severe psychotic episodes for a disease that she almost certainly didn't have. Who knows if she had some other disease or mental health issue, but the treatments that she was taking for years certainly didn't seem to be helping and were apparently causing her hallucinations and delusions. This, according to her, was a sign that they were working, despite seeing no improvement in her original symptoms. The comments eventually turned into her begging for the guy to give her daughter back. She resumed posting for a little bit after getting out of jail, but now her account is gone again. There was a post in the relationship Reddit maybe a year ago from a woman who had found some disturbing content on her boyfriend's computer. He had gone out of town and she was looking through his laptop and found out about his extreme and very specific interests in all matters pertaining to the boudoir, namely the domination and bringing about of pain on the other party. If I recall correctly, she was an Asian woman, and his fantasies about that stuff apparently focused on Asian women. She said some other stuff, like about how he'd go out of town on hunting trips with old buddies for days at a time, but she'd never met any of these friends. There was some other circumstantial, potentially disturbing stuff, and she deleted the post soon after, and I never saw anything about it, but a lot of people were telling her to get out of the house before he got back. There was a post a few years ago about a guy who had served in the military, had PTSD, and his wife and partner would jump out and scare him despite him making it known he didn't like it. One day he was in the bathroom and she burst in, surprising him, and he turned around and punched her fair in the face. He was scared and didn't know what to do or whether he'd be charged, and never posted any follow-ups. Still wondering what happened to that one. Well, that's just a really sad story no matter what way you look at it, and there are still no updates. In case you were wondering, folks, don't punch your partners, and definitely don't jump out at traumatized folks because they may not have much control over how they respond. There was a post on WTF about 5 years ago where someone killed someone and took pics of their decapitated head with sunglasses. The mods took it down because apparently reverse image search showed nothing. I think it was from the relationship Reddit. Woman who thought she was being tricked by her boyfriend. She described smelling cooked fish, but he'd served chicken for dinner. Eventually, commenters convinced her to go to the hospital. She updated with, "It's a brain tumor. I have surgery tomorrow." I still think about that post, and I never really found out if things worked for her. It legitimately freaks me out. It was really weird things too, like she'd think her boyfriend told her that he was cooking salmon, She'd smell salmon cooking, and then she'd walk into the kitchen and he'd have made lasagna. Or that he would have told her that he was going out that evening, and then she'd come home and he'd be like, "Didn't we agree that we'd do a movie night?" Or something like that. She thought her boyfriend was playing mind games with her and was super confused. And then the edit was just, "This is scary, but I have a tumor in my brain. I'm having surgery tomorrow." Another one from the relationship Reddit. A few years ago, there was this post. If I remember right, a family friend was staying with a married couple after being diagnosed with cancer and being incredibly down on his luck with prior ailments. The wife started noticing inconsistencies in this friend's stories, and him never wanting company to any of the doctor's visits seemed a little odd. She was also questioning how he could appear in relatively good health, while claiming he's receiving aggressive treatments for his health issues. She posted because she was growing suspicious and wanted validation if it was odd, and if so, how to approach her husband with it. Fast forward to a few months back, and there's a sword and scale episode about it. Apparently the friend attacked and killed her, knifed the husband too, and then tried to self-delete. He was faking all along while stealing money from the wife's company. I've searched for the post, but I haven't been able to find it. There was a page asking older virgins why they were still virgins, and this 40-something-year-old guy answered, and then his last sentence was some joke about not wanting to be alive anymore. People kept prying, and he eventually said something about waiting for his mother to pass away so he could self-delete guiltlessly. I think he said she'd just died and he planned to do it in about 3 months or something. He had this thing all planned out and thought through. He said no one could talk him out of it, and after going through more and more of his post history, he seemed more and more genuine and not at all like a troll. He was very polite about the whole thing, if that makes any sense. I thought about saying anything at all to him, but everyone else who did was politely thanked and dismissed, and I couldn't think of anything original, so I held off. I had his comments saved, and I remember checking in on it sometime later, well after those 3 months, and he hadn't posted anything after that point. I still think about it from time to time. There was a really creepy post from a guy who found a bunch of Wi-Fi signals from a hole in the ground in Hawaii and linking the owner to a strange eBay store that sells, quote, broken hard drives with very happy customers. All the reviews were people being way overly enthusiastic about these broken hard drives, which sold for a good chunk of money. There was a girl telling a story about how she was 6 months or so out from marrying her fiancé. Nothing seemed to be wrong with the relationship, and they absolutely loved each other. However, one day he went out to go get milk, but never came back. He even bought the milk too because they saw the charge, but nobody knows what happened to him. I think this happened a very short while ago too. Okay, found it. But I think she deleted the comment since it's not in the original thread anymore. Here's what she posted. My fiancé disappeared. We were both 27 and have been a couple since the age of 16. Friends before that. A little bit over 2 years ago, we started a sort of road trip all over the country with our own self-made tiny house on wheels. We had the most fun ever just traveling with the two of us. We did this for all this time, and 7 months ago, while lying on our bed and talking, he just asked me if I wanted to marry him. I obviously said yes. Things just got even better from there. A week after that, he went to the store in the city we were currently living in while I'd already started cooking, and he never came back. He made it to the store and bought the stuff we needed, but he never came back. No one has heard of him since, not even his mum, who he was Skyping with every evening as long as we had connections available. I've lost everything. He was my boyfriend, fiancé, best friend, and also the only real friend, because it was only us two for the last years. I've pretty much given up on everything and have gotten really sick and have horrible health problems. I've also lost close to 25 kilos and I'm now extremely underweight. All of that in the last 6 months. I just want to know something, anything. There was a guy who showed up in Ask Reddit asking how his newborn child could have absolutely none of his traits in blood. A whole list of things were proposed, including that his wife was a chimera, not the mythological beast. Of course, eventually someone posted the most obvious theory, that the kid wasn't his. He said that was impossible, and after a few hours he said he was going to get a paternity test done just to show us. The next day he posted that it was done, and when he had the results in a few days, he'd post a picture to prove us all wrong. 2 days later, the post and account were deleted. If true, guessing the test went badly. There was a teenage girl who posted in the relationship Reddit a long time ago for dealing with her mum. The girl was extremely sick and the mum was crazy and thought that the cure for every disease was just eating more vegetables and didn't believe in doctors. Everyone was telling this poor girl to go to the emergency room ASAP because of the symptoms she listed. I just hope she's okay. Some guy found a coffin in his driveway. Inside it were a key and a piece of paper with geographical coordinates on it. He posted them. I went there and took pictures. It was a cemetery. The exact coordinate was actually between several graves. And no, I did not dig any of them up to solve the mystery. This was almost certainly an expensive prank, or one from someone who had a spare coffin for reasons unknown, but the infinitesimally small chance that one of these graves contained some sort of mystery or treasure is the kind of thing that'll scratch some of our brains forever. Very, very weird and wonderful. You know, there's a couple of posts I wonder about. One with the guy whose wife was pregnant, but he got fixed many years ago, and another one with the kid who found a spy camera in his foster parents' bathroom. A couple years ago, there was a young woman on the Raised by Narcissists Reddit whose parents were part of a deeply Christian faith and had arranged for her to marry a guy her age. She couldn't go to school, she couldn't have a job, her parents would lock her out of the house, and she was basically forced to live in a small backyard cabin with her soon-to-be husband. She had to hide the fact that she was posting because if her future husband found out, her parents would become violent. She was very scared of them. The parents gave the underage guy alcohol, and to put it lightly, he was not a good partner. But she couldn't do anything about it because the state she lived in would return runaways, and CPS had been around but never actually did anything. One day, she made a post that her husband had seen her posts. She was scared he'd ask questions, and then never posted again after that. I just wanted her to know that if she's still out there, we're still counting down to her 18th birthday. I hope you get free from those people. That person who won the $100 million jackpot was trying to escape his family and friends, who were after his money. Where are you now, friend? Ha, nice try, family member. Oh yeah, I remember that thread. Nightmare Expo did a video on that on YouTube. Apparently his mother tried to poison him, but it didn't kill him. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. A young girl, about 19 if I remember, posted on relationships about her father. He had a shed that he banned all members of his family from entering, and one day she went in. He had his computer in there. If I remember correctly, there were photos on the computer which showed animals that had been subjected to some horrible treatment and then dismembered. The photos had clearly been taken in the shed. She said her dad was the perfect conservative father. He seemed to realize that she had used his computer and things were tense in the house. She deleted the post within a few hours. There was the one about the guy who went with his girlfriend to visit her parents, and in the middle of the night she got up and he thought he heard certain noises coming from the next room, leading him to believe the whole family was into some pretty immoral and illegal stuff, but he never posted an update after he said he was going to confront her about it. There was one with a 16 or 17-year-old kid who had just found out he apparently had a letter tattooed on his back that he never knew about. He had gone swimming with his friend and they commented on it. Never read an update and I can't find the post now. I've been wondering about him ever since. There was a kid who took his car to the mechanic for routine work or something, and the mechanic found a GPS tracker attached to his car. Someone who worked at that place that manufactured the devices commented that it was a specific model GPS tracker that only law enforcement use. And that's when crap hit the fan and things took off. I believe the original poster started connecting the dots and then the feds showed up out of nowhere trying to intimidate him. Turns out the FBI was tracking this kid. He found out when the FBI showed up at his house when he tried to sell the device on Craigslist. There are news articles about it and everything. His best friend, Khaled, had apparently made a suspicious blog post about a bomb and a mall. When the car owner asked his friend about it, he said he'd written something stupid but wasn't involved in any wrongdoing. There was the guy who posted about finding a weird hidden chamber behind a sealed manhole inside a motorway bridge as a teenager. Inside was a chair facing a wall with a picture of an undressed woman in a fairly grisly crime scene. The finder delivered and went back years later and took photos. They're frickin' terrifying. There was a post about a guy who sold his house and secretly lived at the bottom of the garden afterwards, but I can't find it anymore. There was one where a lady was cleaning her house and found a tooth, and somebody jokingly said, "Someone's living in your crawl space." But then a dentist looked at the tooth and revealed it was in fact a child's. The lady concluded there was certainly no child living in her attic. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was in her place though. So she went into the attic and says there are some things up there and calls the cops. The next day she updates that there was indeed a dude just chilling in her attic, looking at adult magazines, peeping on her shower, stealing her lacy undergarments, and collecting number 1 and 2 in jars. Turned out to be the local church pastor. It was insane to read that as it played out in real time. It's by far not the most mysterious post on Reddit, but certainly in our little community over on Reddit Argentina. Basically, the user AmITheA made a post stating he wanted to visit Villa 31, an infamous slum over there. He wanted to talk with the people living there, walk around, and stuff like that. Everyone either advised against it, told him to find an insider as a guide, or joked about his death. And that was his last post 3 years ago, never to be heard from again. We're pretty sure he's dead, but nobody knows anything for sure. The guy who actually somewhat credibly drew the conclusion that his mother was poisoning him with cyanide. Last he was heard from, he'd escaped to out of state. It was in the relationship Reddit. It was a self-described dwarf who said his tall girlfriend was mistreating him. He needed advice on how to or if he should leave. And the next day, the post was gone. I haven't found a follow-up and I'm really concerned for him. Anything the user Worthless319 posted. He seems like he's got some untreated mental disorder. He talked about shooting his own eggplant off, cooking it and eating it to please God or something, and he actually showed picture proof that he'd done that. He'd constantly post all of these weird questions about self-deletion for God or something until his post history ends with him saying how he was traveling across the country because he found someone who was willing to unalive him, but then he was headed back home because the guy was going to eat him after he died and he didn't want that. Also, he'd occasionally post cute pictures of his pets. Wow. Well, despite the very tempting prospect of seeing some cute little pets, I might have to forgo the opportunity to look up that profile because it sounds like there'd be some things that I just don't really ever want to have burned into my brain there. Yet another one from the relationship Reddit, in which a woman seemingly caught her nephew hiding some recording device at the bathroom she and her family used. The nephew was 18 years old. I remember she did one update where she talked to her husband and he wanted to involve the police, and she said she would probably do that and would update later. It's been maybe a year now, but couldn't find an update. Not so much a mystery as it's clear what happened, but we never got closure on it. The user Flippin'Flop's Datura post in the Substance Reddit. For those of you who don't know, Datura is an extremely potent medicine, or poison, that's classified as a hallucinogenic deliriant. Unlike psychedelics, they give true hallucinations that are not discernible from reality. Like you'll see your friend come into the room, have a long conversation, only to have them disappear into smoke. It's also a very confusing and disorienting substance that obliterates short-term memory and lasts a long time. Even in the Substance Reddit, a community where regular substance misuse is openly talked about, the consensus from everyone was, "Don't do it, dude, it's a horrible idea." The original poster decided, despite everyone saying, "Dude, don't do it," to go ahead with it anyway. Not too long after that, in that thread you can see him post, "Google.com how normal again, stop now." Then the next and last thing he posted was in the gaming Reddit where he says, "Please these big dog fighting nah okay," and then nothing else. Nobody knows if he died from taking too much, which isn't unlikely if what he said he took was true, he took a heroic dose. Or if he was a troll, or just suffered through that, or learned a lesson and quit substances forever. But there was nothing else posted by that account ever again. There was a guy who wanted to try smack. He was convinced he could give it up on demand. Everyone was telling him not to, and he did it anyway. The next 3 years of his posts, you could see his descent into addiction and cries for help to get out. I can't remember the username, but it was sad to see. The user Yay Video Games created a thread on the gaming Reddit and then spammed it with variations of the phrase "Steamworks goes Ubisoft DRM bye-bye." He then wrote 4,000 comments on that thread that were all different in a non-predictable pattern, so it's unlikely that a bot did it. He also sometimes posted links to creepy, weird images and even a picture of a piece of paper filled with this exact phrase. People believe he went insane, but we don't really know what happened. 2 years ago, a woman posted about how her husband had started knowing things that happened in the house, like someone dropping by but never entering the house. All these things that happened while he wasn't there. She mentioned he might be monitoring her and seemed pretty frightened. Also mentioned that he was in IT and probably on Reddit. After getting a ton of advice, she never posted again. I'm surprised that nobody has brought up the guy who was in an accident and lived a whole life with a wife and child while he was unconscious for a few minutes post-accident. That one was pretty messed up. If I recall correctly, he snapped out of it by staring at a lamp in the corner of his fake family's house. Someone posted that their extension cord blew a fuse and they found some odd device. Turns out there was a SIM card in there, and after he posted he was going to put it in a phone, he never posted again. It was a reply on Ask Reddit a couple of years back. The original question was directed at campers and the like, inquiring about what strange or creepy or unexplainable things they'd found in the wilderness. The reply detailed an experience that their brother had while orienteering, finding a crater in the middle of an uncharted forest with a 1940s-style ambulance in the center of it. The gurney was still in there but bent, and there were brown smears all over the walls. The original poster said that their brother could probably find it again, but flat out refused to do so. Something about this has always haunted me, and I was hoping that there'd be an update when I dug through my saved posts to find this again, but it turns out the account hasn't been used in 2 years. 2 good ones, but I can't find the first one. It was a guy starting a conversation, asking how he could get a large amount of money, like right now, and everyone replying was not taking it too seriously until he posted a picture of some shady guys standing in a parking lot and staring in his direction, which seemed to imply he was probably in serious debt with some not very good people. He never made any replies after that. And the other one was when a guy found what seemed to be a GPS tracker in his car. At first everyone was talking about if he'd rented the car from somewhere shady, maybe it was someone the government was tracking, until the guy realized that the device would explain his extremely jealous girlfriend always seeming to know where he was, like he'd be somewhere and she'd just text him asking what he was doing at that place. One of his last posts said he was going to confront her when he got home, since she wasn't replying to any of his texts. He didn't post anything since that. A post where a woman was recording her sleep and caught another voice in the recording. It legitimately freaked me out listening to it. A couple of months ago, there was a post from a Russian lady who was sharing text messages she received from a guy while she was in a movie. He got really angry that she didn't reply, not knowing she was in a movie. The guy worked for the company she worked for and had been hoping to ask her out. I wasn't a member of Reddit then, but I downloaded the app after my friend, who's on Reddit, showed me the post claiming the guy might be my boyfriend. And he was. The Russian lady's post made the front page, and she replied hundreds of times to people. She gave out enough information that I could see that it was my boyfriend who contacted her. I confronted him and he confessed. We broke up shortly thereafter. The Russian lady's account doesn't seem to be active anymore. I don't want to mention her name for privacy's sake. I don't blame her because she didn't do anything wrong. On the plus side, the entire event brought me to Reddit, and I've enjoyed my experience here. When did kids with crayons at your restaurant blow everybody's minds? I once drew a very detailed, by crayon standards anyway, diagram of a sea cucumber when I was a wee lad, and I watched the busboy just crumple my masterpiece up with all the other garbage and toss it away. My niece was always quite the drama queen. About 9 years ago, we were eating at a restaurant, and I saw her drawing a lovely landscape. It was adorable watching her draw a sun wearing sunglasses, grass, flowers, and a tombstone. Concerned, I asked what she was drawing. She said, "It's me. We waited so long here that I died." She's an even more dramatic teenager now, God help me. I work as a waiter in Harvester. An 8 to 10-year-old boy simply wrote, "Mum is a butthole" on one of our drawing pads. This one kid, about 5 or 6, drew a very detailed picture of 2 people doing the deed. His parents didn't even acknowledge it. They drew an animal with 2 heads directly onto the table. I asked them what it was supposed to be, and apparently it was their pet dog. Parents offered no explanation on why their pet had 2 heads or why they let their kid draw on the table in the first place. So I showed the kid how he could use a wet wipe as an eraser. When I was in college, my much older sister invited me to dinner at this Italian restaurant with her husband and friends. I knew nobody. I was a nerdy college student, and my sister worked as a dentist, and my brother-in-law was a banker. I had no conversation connections to them or their friends. After sitting awkwardly quiet for several minutes, I noticed crayons on the table. I picked them up and colored a random rainbow design on the butcher paper tablecloth. None of the other dinner guests acknowledged my drawing. I just doodled and doodled as they discussed the adult world. Soon, the waiter came over to refresh our drinks. He noticed my rainbow doodle and immediately started to fawn over my design. Now, this is a fabulous piece of art. We are going to display this masterpiece on the big fridge in our kitchen. He then takes the butcher paper and tears it into 2 sections. He takes my weird little drawing back to the kitchen with him, and this is the moment when my sister leans over to me and whispers, "The waiter thinks you're mentally handicapped." I was so embarrassed. I mean, your first clue probably should have been that nobody in history has ever told a fully abled adult that they're going to put their art on the refrigerator. If you make something really cool, maybe they'll frame it and put it on their wall or something. In any case, I felt the embarrassment from this one radiate through my screen, and my sympathies are with you. There used to be a restaurant in the town I went to college in that was basically a knockoff of Applebee's called Garfield's. It had paper strewn across all the tables and crayons so the waitstaff could write their names down for the customers, and the customers could write whatever they wanted. I was in there one afternoon with my girlfriend when the mother and daughter in the booth behind us decided to leave without paying for their meal. The waitress was at first angry, but then began laughing when she realized that they'd written down their real names repeatedly in crayon all over the table. They were caught by the police less than an hour later, according to the police report. Man, Garfield's. We had one in my hometown. My now husband and I used to go there and write goofy things to each other on the tabletop. One evening he proposed to me by writing, "Will you marry me?" on our table. We've got a lot of good memories in Garfield's. The kids played a game of hangman. The stick figure was fully hanged, and the word they used was my first name. The face on the hanged man had eyes and a straight line for a mouth. It was sort of creepy. To hopefully erase away some of that creepiness, as someone who's worked with kids quite a bit, they're terrible at coming up with ideas for hangman. The amount of times I've played with them and I'm able to find the words somewhere in the room is astounding. One of them probably just read your name tag or something and decided to use that. It's still hilarious and slightly ominous, though. Not something a kid drew, but a funny story. I went to greet my table once and the parents asked me to take the red crayon. Only the red one, because their daughter will eat red crayons and not any other colors, just red. The red one tastes the best. She didn't leave a drawing, but I had an 8-year-old take the entire order for the kids' table in purple crayon for about 7 kids and herself. She told me she had aspirations to be a waitress. Unfortunately, I trusted her order and she got it slightly wrong. Hopefully she's contemplated other career options. Her drawing's still on my fridge though. A family bought some extremely loud toys with them to a nice restaurant. It was a macaroni grill, cheesecake factory style sort of place. Patrons around them complained because they had 3 kids who each had 1 or 2 extremely loud toys, like a car with a police siren, there was a kid's megaphone, kid's boombox with animal sounds, stuff like that. My manager came over and offered to relocate them and they refused. He gave them a free appetizer but said they'd have to put the toys away. And the kids proceeded to draw at least 5 pictures of my manager getting murdered by jungle cats, tanks, a game of hangman, death incarnate, and some other random stuff. When they left the pictures on the table. My manager proceeded to show every employee in the restaurant, all the while laughing himself to death. We got them framed for him for Christmas. Some little kid wrote #FreeTubbySmith. One time, this really sweet little girl said she drew me a picture and not to look at it until after she left. It was folded up on the table. So I walked over after she leaves and she had written in crayon really big, "You are gay." I died laughing and I kept it. Child about 7 wrote, "I own this restaurant now." Well, it's written, what can you do about it? I'm not a waiter, but my daughter at 5 colored a picture of Abraham Lincoln, her school's name, and gave the president red lips. My husband calls it Babraham Lincoln and it's still on our refrigerator. She's 7 now. Years ago, small town, a doctor and his wife with their 3 very well-behaved boys came in for dinner. I used to love this family, always polite and ordered well. The second or third time taking care of them, I was taking their orders when their youngest, no older than 8, handed me a piece of paper from his Blue's Clues notebook. Scrawled in very legible writing, in red crayon was, "May I have a plate of bacon, please?" And yes, he even drew a strip of bacon. The word poop over and over. I love it when I see little kid graffiti. It's always something like butts or something that they think is edgy. I mean, my nephew wrote poo on a paper plate and hid it under my sister's pillow. He blamed it on his dad. This is kind of related. I'm a librarian and we keep pencils and paper all over the library for people to write call numbers on when they're looking for books. I always find and keep notes with art or weird writing in them. One of my favorites is a note that had one word on it. Cannibalism. One favorite art picture was a picture of Pikachu with a heart on its tail, and it said something like, "I'm a girl, deal with it." They drew the family undressed in the swimming pool. I'm a parent, not a server, but my 6-year-old son has drawn pictures of our waitresses and given them to our servers on multiple occasions. He always draws them with big eyes, long lashes, and a happy smile. When he gives them to the server, he always compliments them on something: their hair, their jewelry, the color of their nails, stuff like that. In short, my son has more swagger at 6 than I've had my whole life. Yeah, how come when this kid hands women stick figure drawings of themselves it's appreciated, but when I do it they tell me I'm banned from coming back to the bank? Double standards are ridiculous, man. In high school I worked at a breakfast restaurant named after Humpty Dumpty. Had a kid artistically rendition a Humpty coloring page into what he titled Smackhead Humpty, complete with a pipe and bloodshot eyes. A bit of a masterpiece, really. We should have framed it. There was a wall of kids' drawings at my local Five Guys, and some kid had written, "Five Guys makes me poop." I was in a bar that acted as a community cafe during the day, so the walls were decorated with children's drawings, mostly pages from coloring books. There was one freehand picture among the badly scribbled-in Elsa's and Spider-Man. It was a blobby, four-legged potato man with the word "No" written in large, crooked letters above it. Then I flicked the drawing over, and in the same handwriting, just the word "Die." It really tickled me. Not a waitress, but the parent. My daughter drew a dolphin and a whale swimming together. Looked like two male organs having an arm wrestling match. Oh, I kept this one for a very long time. A 6 or 7-year-old girl drew me pictures of the separate components of blood: red and white blood cells, platelets, and plasma. It was real cool, but different. An adorable little girl came up to me and asked for empty pictures. It took me a while to realize that she meant blank paper. I had to take a moment to get myself back together because the concept of her thinking that the papers were pictures which hadn't been drawn yet almost brought me to tears. I was a waitress at a sushi restaurant, and last summer, a kid gave to me a drawing of a green sushi tank that was firing glitter. I thought it was brilliant, actually. I hope that kid becomes a creative adult. There was a coloring page that was of a little girl holding a dog. The little girl who colored it in, who was 4, drew a rope around the girl's neck, and the only color she put on the girl was making her face purple. We still have it hung up behind the bar, out of the sight of customers. Sometimes I look at the picture and worry about that little girl, and sometimes I just laugh. There were a couple of teenagers, and it was a Five Guys. 2 people came in and ordered, looking clearly out of it like they were, shall we say, medicated or on something. And later we found one of the index cards that said, "I've been up for 5 days on Crystal, and I ate a Five Guys burger and felt okay." I call that a decent review. I'd give crayons to almost anybody if they seemed like the type that would enjoy it. I loved giving crayons to first dates, it always went really well. One time I was bussing the table after this elderly couple left, and the wife had drawn a very detailed, anatomically correct male organ. Like superbad Jonah Hill eggplant drawings level of dedication to the craft. A magnificent, veiny pillar drawn by this unassuming little old woman while her husband sat across the table. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. As a kid, I had this whole made-up story world with humanoid cats, and I used to write books on the computer about them. They were stored and password protected on hidden floppy disks, and at around 9 I learned the hard way that crappy dad didn't even respect even a tiny bit of my privacy, so he'd go through my diaries, even the locked ones, and then make fun of me. I'd draw detailed pictures of all the characters. I have different outfit pictures drawn for different occasions, like a princess dress versus the character's adventure clothes. I had a couple of characters that I'd always draw on coloring pages or the paper table coverings when we went out to eat. They were often accompanied by short stories if I had time. I'd made servers drawings of themselves as cat people more than once. My mum ended up letting me draw one of the characters to get added to a mural she was having painted in the nursery for my, at the time, unborn sister. My uncle was a professional artist, and he did this gorgeous fairy tale castle mural. He basically traced my drawing of my princess cat onto transfer paper and put it right on the wall, and then helped me paint it in. It's a really nice memory. At Five Guys, I saw some kid's crayon drawing hanging on the wall that said, "I love Five Guys in my mouth." I was a hostess. At 9 years old, a kid drew himself as a pizza chef with, "Give me my fricking seat," lovingly written next to it. I think I have it on my computer somewhere. My ex always used to draw what he referred to as urban art, which consisted of an undressed lady with her legs spread with a bag over her head. He passed it off as something that my 2-year-old had drawn one time and proceeded to horrify our waitress, who probably had 20 employees over to see it, and we were asked to leave. And that's probably the least offensive situation he's ever put me in. I simply cannot imagine why he's your ex now. A picture of me with the following captions: our waitress, nerd, and can I take your order? Which I didn't even say. A very sweet, quiet, polite boy that was a serving dream. I laughed so hard when I lifted his plate and found that. It was like 15 years ago and I still have it somewhere. Family of 8 sitting next to me. The kid drawing is a chubby toddler making noises while scribbling on his paper kids menu. His mum asks him, "What are you drawing, sweetie?" And he replies in this old mannish rasp, "I gotta draw my own damn milkshake because it's taking too long." The family lost it while the mum scolded him. When I was about 7, I wrote my home phone number on the table because I thought my waitress was cute. She called the number thinking my dad wrote it. And no, don't know how she mixed up a 7-year-old's handwriting with a 40-year-old's. My mum answered the phone and accused my dad of cheating. After hearing them yell at each other for a while, I finally told them the truth. Needless to say, they still laugh about it and at me to this day. Oh boy. So was your dad just a really hot guy? Was he putting out flirty vibes? And more importantly, was your mum there in the restaurant while this was happening? There are any number of factors that make this just that little bit funnier and weirder to think about. You're probably old enough to call back that number if you have caller ID. Not super weird, but memorable. When I was a waiter in college, I had a table of 2 that consisted of a mum in her mid to late 30s and her 9-year-old son. The kid had a set of markers and a sketch pad. He was writing what I thought was a nickname as a graffiti tag over and over. It was D Nice. Honestly, the kid was pretty talented for a 9-year-old kid, and I complimented him on his artistic flair and asked his name, thinking if this was a D name like Derek or David or something. But he said it was Brett. So I asked what his tag stood for then, and he said it was because his mum's name was Denise, and D Nice was his tag as a tribute to her because he loved her. I thought that was awesome. I'll never forget Brett, and I hoped he tagged his mum's name all over the place when he got older. I was in the waiting area of a local Mexican restaurant for my very, very late date to show up. I was dinking around on my phone when the only other person in the room, a little girl of about 4, started talking to me. Her mum was a server there, and her dad was a cook. She hung out in that waiting area, kind of like a small living room, and colored when her parents worked the same shift. At one point, I saw her scribble a name at the top and sprint off to the kitchen saying, "I'm going to give this to someone, watch my stuff." And I did. She came back a minute later, dragging her feet and still holding the ripped-out page of her coloring book. "She said she already has too many from today," she said sullenly. "Well, I didn't get one," I replied. "Oh, what's your name?" She put her crayon down to the page as if to write my name, but must have gotten impatient since she crossed out the other name and handed it to me. She was so proud, she went and told the original recipient that the picture had found a home anyway. My date arrived as the little girl came back, so I said goodbye and tucked the picture away to avoid the mole sauce. I still have that somewhere. In short, I received a masterpiece. I remember overhearing some mother tell her kid, "Oh no, you've got to color him in a real skin color," after he'd colored the kid in the picture brown. Tangentially related, in college I hung out with a nerdy crowd, and I mean even by internet standards. We were music majors and enjoyed going to Macaroni Grill, as that restaurant gives crayons to everyone and uses drawing paper rather than tablecloths. Also, it was better Italian food than Olive Garden, which in turn was better by miles than what we normally had on campus. We had a game where, once we'd placed our orders, we had until the food came to use the crayons to write a snippet of a composition, and then we'd have each other perform it once we got back to the dorms. We were so nerdy, this was actually fun, and became a monthly tradition that spread outside of our little circle. Not at a restaurant, but my girlfriend's daughter made a pretty interesting drawing the other day and hung it up on the fridge. It was a stick figure holding what appeared to be a severed head in one hand, complete with a smiley face and what appeared to be a neck hanging off. I saw it and asked her to tell me all about it. Turns out the severed head was actually an ice cream cone. Reminded me that kids see this world entirely differently than adults. Once on my way out of a restaurant, I walked by a family that had a little guy like maybe 7 years old, and he was putting the finishing touches on the Wu-Tang logo drawn in yellow crayons on his kid's menu sheet. Awesome kid. At least it looked like the Wu-Tang logo. I choose to believe that's what he was drawing. At Applebee's with my ex and her kid. I'd already given up on the relationship and life at that point, so I said, F it, let's go to Applebee's. Her 5-year-old boy spent the first 10 minutes we were there alternating between spilling orange soda and scribbling on the placemat/child distraction device. After a meal that failed to meet my even already abysmally low expectations, we trudged out. As I was leaving a wadded $5 bill for our tip, I noticed that the kid had drawn a giant purple male anatomy with a speech bubble saying, "Rawr." It even had testes. Had someone draw a really detailed and frankly impressive furry smut on the back of a menu. I actually kept that for a while. Every time my husband and I went to a restaurant and had nice leftovers of any kind, we'd always get a box to take home. Usually it was my entire entree, because by the time I ate salad and bread, I wasn't hungry any longer. With 4 teenage daughters at home, however, I never got to enjoy my entree the next day. One of them would always get into the box and pick it clean. So one night my husband found some crayons laying on the restaurant table and marked the takeout box in big letters, "Stool sample." Nobody touched my dinner that night, but he got some really disgusted looks from other customers as he was walking through Outback Steakhouse with that box. I'm just a dentist, not a waiter. In my waiting room, we have coloring books for the kids. One day a patient informed us of some of the pictures in said books. Pages and pages of Alvin and the Chipmunks with exposed women's chests and male members. Also various vulgar words. We hung them in the break room for a laugh. Haha, I mean, I misread that you hung them up in the waiting room for a second there, and what you actually did is far more preferable. I can imagine that while some would have appreciated the artwork, it may not have helped you retain customers. They just drew a single hyper-realistic eye. Scrawled on the table, menu, various napkins, and anything else they could reach, "I love Jake Paul, Jake Paul, Jake Paul, I will marry you, Jake Paul, love, love, not Logan, only Jake." She was also given an iPhone during the meal and a healthy dose of parental neglect during the time they were there. I was bussing and found a comic 2 little girls had drawn. Panel 1 was a girl being asked out by a man named Bob. In panel 2 she rejects him, and in panel 3 Bob has disappeared. Panel 4 they search Bob's house and they find Bob on a noose and it says, "Oh no, Bob ended himself." Weird as F. I'm not a waiter, just an older sibling. We went to a restaurant that let you draw on the tablecloth. My sister drew an elephant, and then my 8-year-old brother drew a blimp holding it up. Then for good measure, he drew a massive symbol of the Third Reich on the blimp. We'd just watched Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. He got a firm talking to and a bit of a history lesson as well. When I was a kid, I had to go to church twice every Sunday. I'd entertain myself drawing. I must have been a twisted 6-year-old because I'd often draw pictures of dismembered bodies, like a guy with his legs chopped off, with a little circle in the middle where the bone was chopped. Thankfully, I didn't turn into a psycho killer or anything. I just grew up and forgot about this weirdness. More than 35 years later and 1,000 miles away, I was sitting in church and saw a folded-up piece of paper. I opened it and there was a picture of a dismembered body obviously drawn by a child. I was like, "Aww." Some little girl drew what was obviously supposed to be Jesus and blood raining down, and it said, "The Rampster is coming," and it made me laugh because of the misspelling, but it was also terrifying. He drew a fake Kmart sales circular with the tagline, "Michael Jackson sale, boys' pants half off." And let's say some of the pictures of said pants half off left little to the imagination. What unethical practices do a lot of schools follow that mess up your kids? Bullied or persecuted students having the same repercussions as their bully for defending themselves. All it does is enforce the idea of, I'm going to get suspended anyway, may as well make it worth it. It does the exact opposite of what's intended. Our assembly room and gymnasium had the fire escape doors chained shut and the police department was aware of it. You should call the fire department next time, they will burn that crap down themselves. Figuratively, of course. One of the few people you don't want to mess with is the fire marshal. Requiring you to purchase textbooks brand new from the college's bookstore because that's the only way to get the access code to complete the required assignment on the publisher's website. Less severe, but limiting kids' access to water, as in you can't have your drink bottle at the table, which sucks when you live in Australia and at summer the temperatures get up to 36 degrees Celsius and school is during all the hottest hours of the day. I was a decently misbehaved third grader. I told my teacher I had a stomachache and I needed to go to the nurse. I asked a number of times. She thought I was just trying to get out of individual reading time, and my appendix burst on the bus ride home. I was never one to ask to go to the nurse, just a hyperactive kid that my teacher apparently had had enough of. Denying medical attention to an 8-year-old seems unethical. This is not a boy who cried wolf story for all those saying, "I told you so." I had a bully in middle school grab and twist my thumb hard enough to snap a tendon. Or whatever it is in your thumb, it's been a while, and nothing happened to him since he'd have to sit out football if he was punished. Passing students that aren't ready for the next grade because they need to pad their passing rates to keep funding. It's setting the kids up for failure down the road. Giving preference to kids that parents donate money and fraternize with teachers and headmasters. The person that bullied me was the child of the school board governor. The head teacher decided to sit both of us kids down to talk it out, and she burst into crocodile tears and told them I was the one hurting her. Guess which one of us got believed and which one got yelled at. Yep, pays to have important parents. Yeah, that's a kid who's learning all the wrong lessons in life. Bully, lie, and rely on mummy and daddy to get you out of any of the consequences of your actions. Great job, everyone. Good job. Everyone go home. Firing lunchroom staff for serving food to the poor students whose families can't afford to pay. Only having one bathroom open in high school. There's thousands of kids. This was the deal for us for a little bit last semester. We had a whole devious lick thing going around, and it eventually got to the point that the only restroom that was open was the one near the auditorium. The walk from the classroom to that particular restroom could be 2 to 3 minutes, depending on where the class was. And they were always crowded, yet teachers would still expect us to only take a little while. Underdeveloped gifted programs. Oh, you got through your work quickly? Here's more. Add a couple puzzles. We aren't going to teach you how to study or teach you the social skills that gifted kids often lack. We're just going to tack on more work and stress you out. Good luck in college without those study skills we didn't teach you. My daughter's best friend was running track, and the coaches were yelling at her to run more laps. She told them her legs were hurting really badly, so they yelled at her and told her to run another lap. She started crying because of the pain and ended up falling down and breaking both kneecaps. As she lay there screaming, the coaches didn't even come to help her. One of the kids had to call 911, and when they showed up, the coaches acted like they didn't know what to do with the situation. To make it worse, my daughter was on the volleyball and track team, and they tried to do the same to her, but I went up to the school and went off at the principal and coaches about pushing the kids too hard, just so the coaches could win their games. I sent my daughter to rehab for her leg issues, and they said her legs were stressed and the coaches were overworking her. So I'll be taking this up with the school superintendent. Not letting kids go to the toilet when they need to. I distinctly remember one kid in my German class bursting into tears because he just couldn't hold it any longer. He asked at least 3 times. My parents always told me that if I absolutely can't hold it any longer, and a teacher is still telling me no, to just walk to the bathroom and go. Then text my parents with what happened, so if I got in trouble they could back me up. You can get a bladder infection for holding it too long, and it's just ridiculous not to let a student go to the restroom. This is at a university level. Say you're a grad student who just secured an opportunity to travel internationally with university funding for your research. You put in a travel request with a suggested travel and lodging budget that gets approved within your funding. You, the grad student, still have to front the money no matter how much it is, and reimbursement can take 3 weeks to 3 months depending on how much pressure the finance office is under. They operate on a first-in, first-out basis. So, you secured this wonderful grant for thousands of dollars, making no to little money as a grad student, and maybe you're even a fully funded student paying no tuition. You still might be too poor to actually conduct the research you were brought there to do. Awarding perfect attendance, encouraging kids to go to school while sick is pretty unethical if you ask me. My school had exemptions, meaning if you had perfect attendance each semester, you got to skip 2 of your final exams. 1 or 2 absences or tardies and you got 1 skip. More than that, you had to take them all. We were all sick all the time because nobody could bear to give up their exemptions. Not letting kids go to the bathroom. God forbid you're a kid with a small bladder or a teen girl. In 5th grade, I had this teacher who told me I couldn't go to the bathroom unless I said out loud what I was going to do. But that was so embarrassing to me. I told her no, but she only laughed and said, "Well, guess you don't want to go then." Guess who ended up peeing herself while running out the door? My dad was less than understanding, and those were my new denim shorts as well. Bullied students are told to leave because it's easier to kick out a quiet victim than a loud bully. Lowering a school's funding if the SAT scores are low. If the scores are low, there should be more funding to help kids learn. I had a student who never showed up and never did any work in my class. The principal asked me to change his F to a 75. I emailed back explaining that the student never made an effort and stuff like that. He told me to be a part of the team and do as I was told. I was only a second-year teacher and was afraid of losing my job, so I obliged. Same principal, a couple of years later, we had a very large student, and as she walked down the bus ramp one day, some boys called out the bus window the filthy things they wanted to do to her, while also calling her fat. I wrote them up and chewed them out. When the principal read the referral, he simply said, "Well, boys will be boys," and tore up the referral. To this day, I wish I would have asked him what he would have done if that was done to one of his daughters, but I was so shocked. It still boils my blood. The same thing happened to me as a teacher. I stuck to my principles and lost my job. A good thing in hindsight, but it was devastating to me at the time. Collective punishment. One or two pupils misbehave and the entire class gets punished for it. In the case of there being a fire, I think it's stupid that we have to go in alphabetical order. So Adam is happy and healthy, but Zach just turned into ash. In my opinion, they should all just get in a line no matter what. The worst? Probably the sky-high cost of attendance. The most visible evidence of this is the endless list of administrators, administrative assistants, specialists, administrative associates, and the list goes on. Unless you're dirt poor and qualify for Pell Grants in the US, the cost of a name-brand school is hard to swallow. Add inflation and it's even worse. If a bully starts a fight and you defend yourself, you get suspended for fighting. If a bully starts a fight with you and you do nothing to defend yourself, you get suspended for fighting. If you run from a bully to avoid a fight, you still risk being suspended for fighting. This is why I beat the poop out of a bully when I was in the 8th grade. I figured that if I was going to be suspended for the actions of someone whom I couldn't control, I might as well earn it myself. Yeah, I get the feeling that zero-tolerance bullying will once again be making many repeat appearances in one of our videos. If your school rule is making kids go, well, when I fight back I should probably just try to hurt them back as badly as possible, and you aren't rethinking your stance, there's a problem. Making school start at 7 AM and the bus route comes by your house before 6:30. So you have to get up around 5:30 to 6 AM every morning. Then, say you have an extracurricular activity that takes at least 2 hours, but if it's a sports game, it's probably closer to at least 4 hours. Then let's say you have a test tomorrow as well as some homework, so you study or work for at least 2 hours. At this point, you've spent well over half your day doing school-related activities. If you want to get a full 8 hours sleep, which is unlikely, that leaves you about 2 hours of free time per day, which a good chunk of it is probably spent eating a meal, showering, getting ready for the next day and stuff. And then people are surprised when teenagers are always tired, depressed, and anxious. Schools are screwed. When I was in school, they could still revoke bathroom breaks, and some teachers still did it even after they made it illegal to ban them. Additionally, in my time, for an entire year, through 7th grade, I only had 1 hour of recess that entire year, because my special ed teacher felt that recess, which was mandatory by law, was a distraction. So what she'd do is punish us so we couldn't take it. This caused a lot of stress and trauma, and then she even prohibited bathroom breaks. Looking back, I really wish my parents had sued. Well, I don't know about other schools, but when I came forward about a female classmate constantly crossing my physical boundaries and verbally bullying me, they shrugged their shoulders and asked if I tried saying no. I'm also female, by the way. She got away with doing it to 2 of my friends and another guy in her grade. She claimed some pretty damning things about that guy, so she got transferred to my stagecraft class. Mind you, she made claims like that constantly, to the point where I was sure she was histrionic because she made a lot of, shall we say, adult comments and stuff like that, all the time, also threatening self-deletion when I told her I didn't want to date her. Our teacher shrugged his shoulders and said, "Oh, okay." Went to the counselor and she told me, "Well, have you tried saying no?" Gee, why didn't I think of that? The last straw was when this girl touched my butt in front of everyone in class, as in poked me while I was bent over working on an assignment. I went up to her, told her to F off, and she never spoke to me again. Instead, moved on to one of my best friends. So in short, my school's unethical practice was not taking stuff like this seriously. Women can be intimidated or victimized, just like men can, and it should be taken seriously regardless of the gender of either of the kids in question. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Bit of a niche one, this one. My school's gym teacher not only didn't stop bullying, but openly supported it because apparently, them little soft, sensitive Fs need to be taught how rough the real world is. And he'd cheer on the bullies when he saw them beating up other students. Well, good gym teachers are hard to find here, so he's staying, was the school's answer to this. Humiliating or calling out students in front of the whole class. Also saying things like, "You'll never pass my class or get into Harvard or get into college," to the entire class for some reason, always with a stupid, arrogant smirk on their face. The first two are true stories. The first from my Honours Algebra 2 class to a class of 15 and 16-year-olds, and the second from my Honours school to a class of 14 and 15-year-olds, which was supposed to prepare me for that exact thing. What makes the second even worse is that the person who said it was, wait for it, the school counsellor. Closing every single bathroom because of one fight in a bathroom. We have 28 bathrooms in our school, all of them closed. We are also the school who made it to international news for throwing out kids' school lunches for being too much in debt to the school. Most good colleges chase rankings to the detriment of the student body. There's also been an abandonment from state schools to provide affordable education to everyone in the state. Having worked in a private school for 16 years, I've got so many answers to this, but I'll limit them to the following 4. Stating in the shiny brochure given to parents that any possession or use of substances means instant expulsion, and then allowing students with substances to return after a 2-week suspension. The only kid at my former workplace who was expelled over substances, and it happened because they stole the money they used to buy them. Then there's telling students that if they defended themselves from local bullies, they'd be suspended. This rule was dropped after a student ended up being pushed into a river after having their nose broken. Then there's letting students sleep in dorms where the walls are riddled with damp because there's, quote, no money in the budget for repairs, while finding the funds to do a full refurb on the toilets in the school auditorium right before the visit of a member of the royal family. And finally, treating male and female students differently. Case in point, a female student got caught performing a down-under kiss on a male student who was moved to a new school, while the boy was allowed to remain where he was. I thought it was pretty weird that 5th through 8th grade at my school didn't have any bathrooms. At all. Also, when I was younger, a mentally disabled kid wouldn't stop making moves on me, so I screamed, the kid started crying and told the teacher I wouldn't be his friend, and I ended up getting yelled at and the teacher said I was being snotty. I got into trouble for making him cry, and he apparently didn't know any better, so I wasn't allowed to scream or yell, according to the teacher, no matter what that kid did to me. Yeah, I really hope it's changed since then. That was in the mid to late 90s. Just about every school is hierarchical and teaches kids to never question authority, in this case the teacher or principal. Teachers are on occasion incorrect or may poorly explain things, and school policy can sometimes be profoundly unjust. It is heavily indoctrinated that children should never question these things, and it's often punished when they do. This leads to people growing up with a very unhealthy hierarchical approach to just about all aspects of life. Too much homework. Let kids be kids. A little homework is good, but God, don't drown the kids in it. We have to stand outside for however long the school wants us to. The longest has been up to an hour. In the winter, in silence, and without coats. Okay, so the average comment in this grouping was made about 4 years ago, and I want to know what in the frick school was getting away with this sort of borderline corporal punishment in 2021. Like, surely if this is in the States, as most of these stories are, this is a lawsuit waiting to happen. Wild. Over-the-top dress code making girls feel like crap because of it. Tormenting socially awkward or introverted students. Not allowing kids to drink water. Like, bro, no discipline is being inculcated by making me thirst in a place where I'm supposed to pay attention to the board. Dress code policing, specifically for girls. Especially for girls. It's demeaning, and I say that as a man. Not allowing people to go to the washroom. One of my friends literally started crying because he had to go and the teacher was going to cut attendance if he put a step outside class. She eventually obliged, but man, what a witch. Convincing kids that a 4-year institution after graduation is the best choice for everyone, no exceptions. Not so much a school problem, but kind of related. When I was in first grade, a couple of third graders cornered me and started saying things like, "Your mum doesn't love you and will abandon you at school," which isn't so bad, but 6-year-old me was devastated. I told my teacher that I was being bullied at recess, and she asked what grade the bullies were in. I didn't know at the time, and I guessed that they were in second. She pretty much responded, "I highly doubt that any of them would do that, but I'll look into it." A little while later, she approached me and told me to stop lying. 7 a.m. classes in complete disregard for what the science says about adolescent development and sleep schedule and the effect of early classes on academic success. Zero tolerance, which at this point is just an excuse not to investigate anything. Making all the girls walk into a classroom and get down on their knees in front of their male classmates to measure our uniform skirts to make sure they're not too short and up to code. Extremely frickin' humiliating as middle schoolers and completely uncalled for. For clarification, the boys didn't measure our skirt lengths, the teachers did. However, instead of bringing us into an empty classroom or just not doing it at all, they'd bring us into populated classrooms with many boys present and do the measurements there. Oh, I so rarely get to tell this story, but I was in a school when the whole yoga pant thing was a craze hit. Are they pants or tights? My school decided that they weren't tights and weren't allowed. One day a girl came in wearing something that looked like tights or jeans, jeggings I think. She said they were skinny jeans. Important, this girl is 16. Well, the male principal got a male teacher, told the underage girl to stand still so the male teacher could run his hands up and down her legs to see if they really were jeans. The girl flips her lid and just starts screaming at both of them. Then she called her dad and told him what they wanted to do. Her father immediately raced to the school and rained hellfire on all of them. Suddenly, nobody cared if you wore yoga pants or not. UK here, maybe not quite on the same track as some of the answers, but basically schools forcing university as the only option after leaving school. Never mind college, apprenticeships, going straight into a job or things like that. They don't want to hear about it unless it's a university. I've even seen schools making students pay and apply for a university even when they've got offers at college or accepted as an apprenticeship. I presume it's because the more students that get offered a place at university, then the better the statistics are, and that seems to be a huge focus, unfortunately, these days. Oh my word, so many to choose from, so here is a short list. First, segregating special education students into what are called Special Class with Integration Rooms, or SKIN rooms. The idea is that the student has a home base and can receive instruction from his or her special education teacher on difficult subjects, and then be integrated into the regular flow of school for the rest of the classes. How it actually works is they keep the special ed kids in there all the time and let them out for physical education, sometimes lunch if they don't have their own lunch period, and for classes that can't be taught in special ed classrooms like the arts. You'll usually find these classrooms tucked away by the boiler room or in the basement if your school has one, or otherwise out of the regular flow of school traffic. And the second is zero tolerance policies. They encourage kids to inflict higher levels of harm since the consequences will be the same. Why shouldn't they just absolutely beat the crap out of the other kid? The street cred alone is worth it. Letting failing students move forward. Assigning 300 problems worth of math homework every night that takes 5 to 10 minutes to write out. On top of that, teachers don't coordinate so they all decide to give 1 to 3 hours worth of homework per night and somehow expect students to complete it all and to not be sleep deprived when they come in the next day. Also, punishing the victims of bullying when they fight back. Seriously, may the fleas of 1,000 camels feast upon you for the rest of your days. How sports programs have way more money than any other programs at the school because apparently school is a business, not education. Selling twice the number of parking passes than spots actually exist for, despite 10 blocks around the school being no parking zones, and then imposing steep parking fines. Keeping bad teachers in their positions, not the same as a good teacher with poorly performing students with bad home lives and stuff. Making kids have to pay for their lunches. I grew up where some students paid full, some paid reduced, and some didn't pay at all, depending on the family's income. If you didn't pay, you got a sandwich with 4 slices of cheese and that was all. But honestly, nobody should have to pay at all for their school lunch. The Pledge of Allegiance. Honestly, it seems like such a fascist practice to the outside observer. Then there's confiscating kids' phones, withholding graduation ceremonies because they've labeled kids as troublemakers, zero tolerance policies, ignoring and covering up bullying. Making kids sell magazines or whatever. Should be 100% illegal, and I don't know what kind of parents stand up for that bullcrap. holding your records and diploma because your parents are behind in payments. I went to a very good but expensive private school, which my parents could consistently pay for when I was very young, but struggled after 2008. When they'd be behind in payments, the school would hold my grades sheet from my parents, so I could never see the comments my teachers would have about me. Finally, at my graduation ceremony, I couldn't have access to my diploma nor my grades, which I needed to complete my college dossier, until my parents paid what they owed to the school. Of course, people should pay their dues, but messing with the students made me feel very bad. Teachers, what signs did you get that a student would go on to be a horrifying criminal? Lots of my students are in gangs. A few have been arrested for some pretty serious stuff, including popping or shanking people. Sad to say, but at an inner-city school, I'm not entirely shocked when kids from our district are in the paper for any sort of crime. The schools try to do something about it when the kids are young, but it's tough when their dads or uncles or neighbors are in gangs. Teacher of middle school here had a weird kid. He was nice to everyone, but when nobody was watching, he'd make his hands into a strangling motion. Sometime in the year, we got a pet hamster, and somebody could look after it. A week later, the hamster was dead with a broken neck. When I asked who it was clear that it was the kid because of the way he looked. He looked guilty, but I said nothing as I had no evidence. Fast forward 10 years, and it turns out he's in jail. What for? Shanking a mother of two for her purse. I've had one former student tried as an accessory to capital murder and another awaiting trial for capital murder. In both cases, the crimes were very violent and all over the news, and in both cases I wasn't that surprised when I heard about it. However, there was no time when I looked at either boy and thought, well, he's going to kill someone one day. What I did think was that they were probably going to pop off at the wrong person at some point and end up in jail or shot. Both boys were very disrespectful to both teachers and other students. They could be charming, but they had hair-trigger tempers and a great dislike of having to follow any rules. However, I've had many students like that grow out of it. I don't look at any student who's a discipline problem and automatically assume he or she will be a murderer. It sucks when it happens, though. There was this kid who went to my school all the way from age 5 to age 17. I invited him to a couple of my birthday parties in this time. At my 10th birthday party, he purposefully knocked my cake off the table before anyone could have a piece. At my 13th, he broke a window and set some paper on fire indoors. And last year he knifed and killed someone and is now in jail. Played D&D with another college student who we eventually found out was a serial killer. Well, not at the time. At the time we played D&D, he was secretly just a regular murderer. Then he didn't show up for one game and we found out that he'd knifed a few more people. There was no evil aura that the guy had, pretty average D&D nerd. But in hindsight, there were some weird things about him. That look when he'd jokingly say, "Oh, I've killed people for less." He played a female rogue, which was weird. I remember during one game, we killed a guard in a castle we were stealth storming, and we went to hide the body, and he was like, "Oh, you can get rid of the body, but there'll be too much blood to hide." You know, it's nice when people bring in their real-life experiences to help you figure out how to solve problems in the game. Okay, in seriousness, there isn't really a correlation between D&D and murder. Hashtag not all D&D players. That said, you always know the players who have murder potential. I used to work at a boarding school in England. We had a kid named Tom who came from an orphanage. Tom was one of the brightest students I ever taught. To be fair, he was actually one of my favorite students at the time, and I'm quite sure almost all the other teachers liked him too. I believed he was one of the kids who would make it in life. Not only because he was a clever student, Tom was able to be very convincing. He had great influence on other students. But in retrospect, I should have seen some signs. Quite often he stayed after class to ask some questions. One of these times, Tom showed a great interest in Horcruxes. It's obvious I haven't told him anything about it. New teacher here, and I teach elementary school, so no major crimes yet. But I've got one kid who I swear will be all over the news in future for something horrendous, be it murder or the unspeakable act or a school weapon-related tragedy. He had no empathy whatsoever. This in itself is worrying, but there are people with little empathy who turn out okay, right? Well, not this kid. He'd hurt the little girls in my class just to watch them cry. Whenever it happened, I'd rush over to the little girl, or if it was outdoor recess, the staff member outside would rush over, and he'd just be standing there staring at her with the weirdest look on his face. Not a smirk necessarily, but just odd. Most little kids will either run away or try to look innocent if you catch them, but never him. He just did not give an F. I asked him once why he was always so mean to this one little sweet girl in particular, and he said she was his favorite. I could barely contain my horrified expression. Like I said, he's going to be on the news eventually, I just hope I don't find out what he did. Well, I had a third grader this week carrying a weapon and he threatened to shoot the security guard, though not while in possession of the thing. So yeah, we'll see in a few years how things end up for him. According to the security guard, who's ex-military, it was a real weapon, but it had been gutted and was essentially just an empty casing. When he eventually threatened that guard later, he specified he was going to get a working one from his, quote, friends. I feel bad for the kid. He scares me, but I do still feel bad. His home life is real bad, and God only knows how many Child Protection Services calls have been made at this point that haven't helped. I substituted for a home economics or cooking class for a couple of weeks. There was this one girl who struck me as a bit odd. It's hard to describe, but I got a bad vibe. She got angry really easily, had zero patience, did not respond well to authority, and would threaten anyone who annoyed her. Obnoxious, yes, but I felt like there was more to it. I asked the department head and she told me this girl, who was about 16, was kicked out of her old school for getting into fights and manipulating another student, a boy with a learning disability, into attempting to shank the teacher. If I see her name crop up on the news in the future, I will not be in the least bit surprised. As a teacher, there are definitely indications that something could be seriously wrong sometimes. I had one female student who was obviously giving off signs that she was ill. When she was finally diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder at the age of 13, I received a few apologies from colleagues to whom I'd expressed concerns about this child. She was expelled in 8th grade for organizing a pretty depraved plot against another girl in her class. She tried to get 4 girls to back her up. One of them turned her in to administration the day of the attempted unalivings. The victim was not knifed as she had planned, and she wasn't charged. Her mother blamed her ADHD. Really? Her mother made a point of bringing her onto campus every day after the expulsion because she had another child at the school. That mum had problems of her own. I'd hoped she wouldn't have children, but she recently gave birth to a second child. Neither child trapped the man that she was trying to get to marry her. She keeps in touch with former students and teachers through Facebook. She doesn't realize we're watching for any sign she might be a danger to these kids. I had another student ask me for help. He was planning to go on a spree against his family. He was caught by one brother doing unspeakable things to a litter of kittens. He had a bit of a history doing horrible things to animals. He asked me to help him turn himself in before he started with people. We had a conversation in which he told me I was the only adult who had ever been honest with him. I helped him. He's been institutionalized since he was 14. This child ended up in my class after being expelled from another school for bringing a knife to school to stop a girl who said he was ugly. After being suspended for having the knife, he walked to school with a 9mm intending to get to the principal. Then he became my student. We had a course mate who was intelligent, shy, and nervous. His father was a professor and mother was a teacher. He had a friend. He tried to kill his friend's grandma with a screwdriver. Everything was planned except that he wasn't expecting resistance. He didn't succeed, luckily, and he's now serving 16 years in jail. I went to school with a girl from elementary all the way to high school graduation. Nice, maybe a little quiet, but a good student with a lot of friends and active in the school clubs and such. A few years ago, she was arrested and charged for the worst sort of the unspeakable act. Without giving away too much identifying information, they found a metric ton of evidence in her home. Thousands of photos. It made me feel ill reading the news stories. I never would have suspected it from her. My mum taught both a serial killer and a radicalized Islamic terror fighter. She said they were both decidedly weird, but no weirder than the normal weirdo students you get in every class. Bit of a switcheroo, but there was a kid in my school who stabbed me twice with a pencil when I was 8 and a scalpel when I was 15. I was sure he'd get himself into too much trouble eventually, but he's totally turned around and seems to have his life back on track. You know me, folks, I'll seize any chance I can get to have a bit of relief from the ongoing barrage of stories of broken trust and dreams and people who didn't get the help or attention they needed earlier on in life. Okay, let's plunge back into it. I taught a high school student that had a lot of impulse control issues. He was labeled EBD, or Emotional Behavioral Disorder, in our special ed program and needed a lot of support. We got along pretty well, and I think deep down he had a good heart, but he'd fly into fits of rage when frustrated. After he graduated, I didn't hear anything about him for a year or two, and then I read in the news that he was being charged with second-degree murder after trying to settle into a family life. Apparently, the noise and demands of a busy domestic household were too much for him. I can't say that I ever thought he'd do something this terrible, but I'm not surprised that he hasn't been able to handle this situation and lost control. It's so sad because he had so much support at school, but once he left, all of that was taken away and he was on his own. I think it's tragic that all of this has happened, and I wish there had been more services in place to help him once he graduated. I went to school with a guy who got arrested after graduating for a string of crimes the narrator can't even say on YouTube. When he was in middle school, he got caught nailing animal heads to trees, so I'd say, yes, there were indicators. There was a kid at my school who wound up getting arrested and convicted for some pretty crazy stuff. He converted to Islam, aided al-Shabaab, that's the group in Somalia, and threatened the creators of South Park. When I was in high school, our chemistry teacher told us about a girl who tried to poison him by putting a chemical in his kettle. He noticed it because it made his tea blue, so there's that. Some girl also went around shanking people with a compass. Thank God none of them had any blood diseases. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My father is a high school guidance counselor. One of the kids he managed was in the news several years ago for killing his parents and taking them apart in the bathtub. My dad was totally stunned and told me that he never saw any signs in that kid. He'd apparently become a serious substance user at the time of the murders. We didn't talk about it other than that one time. Teacher here, a veteran one as well. I'm only posting here because finally a serious message can be sent, viewed, and perhaps start a change. I know which kids of mine are going to go down that path. We see signs all the time, and us good ones pick up on body language and such because it's an essential and useful tool to use. Anyhow, listen, just ask the teachers who the troubled kids are and give the public schools the gosh darn money and proper support for mental health services in the schools. For all the kids, not just the sick ones either. We can significantly help societies really mend their wounds this way. But guess what? Social services in the schools are amongst the first to be cut. Teachers get cut too. The people that stay and never get cut? That's right, the administration. These schools are being run in a business model right now. People need to wake the F up and deal with bullcrap like this. It just isn't right. Reminds me of the graphic novel My Friend Dahmer by Durf. It's about a guy who went through school with Jeffrey Dahmer before he became famous for the murders. You should check it out. Everyone should. Not a teacher, but during my secondary school years, there was this one kid in my tutor group. Slight bit of a butthole, but nothing too dramatic. They were also a bit of a class clown at times. I got on with him okay. There was really nothing out of the ordinary. Turns out he ended up shanking and killing his ex while she was at work. I hear he was a substance user as well before it happened. I was utterly shocked by it. My mum taught in a troubled area. Some of what she's told me is scary. Lots of substances in this area resulting in very disturbed kids. No murderers that I know of, but probably some future ones. She taught kids 7 through 10 years. One of them kept scissor blades in his desk. The mother of the kid mentioned was a crystal addict. Others would punch, bite, and lash out in violent rages. Very disturbed for being so young. I hate to admit it, but I will check arrest records annually for one of my former students. He hasn't committed a crime that I know of, but I'm fairly certain that he will. When he was in middle school, he was caught with some pretty extreme adult magazines, and when the school called his mum, she said, "Oh, I know, I gave it to him. How else is he supposed to learn about doing the deed?" When he was in my class, he'd pull down his pants, sit at his desk bare butt, and make lewd motions directed at the girls in the class. So I'd send him to the office, but they'd send him back when he told them his pants were too big and he needed a belt. His mum won a lawsuit against the district for discrimination at some point in the past, and they were terrified of her. I like to believe in the best in people, but that kid just wasn't right. And his mum was even worse. This was a first for me this summer. A 17-year-old boy in my town was arrested for a string of armed robberies. I taught him when he was 14 or 15 years old. He was a nice kid. I never had disciplinary problems with him, and I recall him being an average student. He did hang out with some D-bags though, and I think they had too much influence on him. I was very surprised when I heard he'd been arrested. I've had other students that I suspected might end up in jail. So far, I haven't seen them on the news yet. In 6th grade, I was in a class with a guy who my friend's sister was trying to get with. He was 3 to 4 years older than all of us, he'd shave daily and have full stubble by the 7th period, and he was a butthole to students and teachers alike. He was also 6'4" and wasn't afraid to swing at teachers. In 7th grade, he got expelled and arrested for really forcibly hitting on a whole bunch of people. I had a student once that all the teachers hated. I taught 7th and 8th grade music in IDOWorkHereLady and had a lot of trouble getting the students used to discipline in general. Anyway, this kid started excelling in my class. I'd let him take his tests verbally at a discrete time so no one would know he couldn't read very well. He'd get up and demonstrate instruments he'd learned to play while he was at juvie. Then one day he just wasn't there anymore. He and a friend decided to jump the next guy they saw because they were bored. Put the guy in intensive care. They were both to be tried as adults. Did I see any signs? Yeah. Held back from high school twice, no parental involvement, fighting in other classes, former juvie sentences, indifferences about not being able to read. In short, student tried to murder someone because bored. There were a lot of signs, still hurt me a lot emotionally that I couldn't make a difference. And somewhat expectedly, here we have it. Just another one in a long list of incredibly troubled people who needed a psychiatrist's evaluation and a lot of treatment, doing damage to other people in a system that ignored a problem for too long because of a lack of funding or motivation. And that applies whether these kids were actually evil or had untreated issues. I'm sure there were signs there were problems coming down the road. My dad always used to tell us the story of how someone he knew at school whacked an old lady as he was climbing out of her window after robbing the care home, by stamping on her neck or something. Apparently he was a bit off at school, but nothing serious, and it was for substance money. I taught behaviorally and emotionally disturbed kids about 10 years back. Most of my kids were pretty terrible students, but one in particular had a severe case of oppositional defiance disorder. During the year I was teaching him, he got in a fight in the hallway and was expelled, as this wasn't his first. He went on to murder 2 people in a substance deal gone bad several months later. My primary thoughts were, absolutely no surprise there, thank goodness he'll be off the streets for a few years, and glad it wasn't an innocent civilian. A first grader in our school system routinely was found carrying knives in his backpack. One day he painted a picture of a family dying in a fire. His teacher asked about it and he said, "Bad things happen to good people." And then he stared at her and with a slight smile said, "You're a good person." Yeah, we're keeping tabs on him. One of my freshman kids last year was arrested for the unspeakable act about halfway through the year. He was kind of a jerk of a kid, but it was clear he was using it to cover up other things. I had a feeling he'd get arrested for something, but never thought it would be so soon and for such a violent crime. I have to admit, though, I was glad he was out of my class. I had a friend in school who my parents were terrified of. I was 9 or 10, and I couldn't stay away from him for some reason, even though our relationship consisted of him being extremely nice to me for short periods of time and then orchestrating an often bloody fistfight. I remember him straddling me and beating the living crap out of me in the playground after school one day. I was bloody and screaming for help, and parents were all around us, just walking by like it wasn't happening. That's people for you. He was in and out of institutions for years and would just randomly come back to my school before disappearing again. Whenever we saw each other again, he'd talk of his fantasy in which he killed both sets of our parents, and then we'd go and live in a shack in the forest somewhere. The last time I saw him as a kid was when he tried to burn my house down. He orchestrated it so we'd be leaving the house after he'd lit the match. Luckily, my dad was around after we'd left and smelt it before it really got going. He was sent to a pretty heavy-duty institution sometime after that. Anyway, I randomly bumped into him last year, and we've been great friends ever since. He's a fitness instructor, performs in an amateur MMA tournament, and has the most positive and gracious, and just plain chilled-out outlook on life, and a truly beautiful doting family. In short, textbook psychopath grows up to be the nicest guy in the room. There were 2 kids in my school, both odd in their own ways. One killed someone with a screwdriver, apparently his girlfriend's mother was always trying to split them up, and then she did something one day and he snapped. Coincidentally, my girlfriend is ex-police and moved into his old house as he was no longer needing it, what with going to prison and all. The other guy committed the unspeakable act on and knifed his own mother, buying himself a one-way ticket to the big house. Not a teacher, but I went to a middle high school with Casey Anthony. She played on my soccer team and dated my ex-boyfriend. She even accused him of being Kaylee's father when he couldn't defend himself. He died in a car accident a few years before all the mess. I never thought she was crazy, but I always thought it was weird she never posted pictures on MySpace or Facebook of her kid until Kaylee was almost 2 years old. No one ever really knew that she had a kid. She partied a lot, and you could tell. She liked the pills, that one. I work at a junior college and had a student that was arrested for murder. She fought a family member that was 6 months pregnant, and, well, things went real bad. She was aggressive in the classroom and had gone off on me and another instructor. She also displayed some bipolar behavior, so I really wasn't that surprised when I saw her on the news. I used to be in a position of training new techs where I work. We had a guy that just always struck me as dirty and creepy. He didn't really do anything creepy per se, I just got a vibe. Sure enough, one day he didn't come in because he was in jail for the unspeakable act. I teach at a post-secondary trade school where we've admitted some people that have gone on to do some horrible things. Arguably, the worst offender was a man who I had little contact with throughout his time at the school because he never showed up to class. He was a first-time father to a child who was less than 2 years old, if I recall, and both he and his girlfriend, the mother, were trying to go to school and take care of the baby at the same time. It didn't work out, and eventually he was terminated from the program. It broke my heart to read the news less than half a year later that he was involved in some truly horrendous crimes. Is this guy the only one that's been through my school and committed a violent crime later? No, and maybe I'll share more later, but this guy really struck a chord with me, and I need a break or I'll just be angry and upset for the rest of my night. What's the most hilarious thing someone has said coming off of anesthesia? Female patient after a C-section asking me how many chickens she had because she had beef with pig. Her husband translated, how much the baby weighed because I have a bet with hubby. Kinda sweet that the husband understood her nonsense so effortlessly. A 15-year-old was waking up and talking more and trying to get out of bed before he was ready. Bud, where are you going? I've got to go to my locker. Buddy, you're in hospital. You can't go to your locker right now. So where are you trying to go? He gave me a very serious expression. The future. My wife is a dentist. One of her patients started moaning loudly. Not the typical moans and groans, I mean like the really good bedroom fun times moaning. It was loud enough that half the clinic heard, including the waiting area. A man asked me if his body parts still belonged to him, and I still think about it. I work in the operating room. Funniest was a guy quickly sitting straight up after extubation. We're all standing around him making sure he doesn't try to jump off the table, and he looks at me and then slowly gives me double finger pistols. Turns his head to another staff member and slowly gives them finger pistols. Didn't say a word, just finger pistols. Pew pew pew. A lot of people wake up really crazy. They just start swinging or getting really restless on a narrow operating room bed. It's really nice when they wake up sleepy and I'll just bundle them up with blankies and roll them out. Emergency room technician here. We often do conscious sedations with ketamine to realign broken bones. I had a 10-year-old girl who snapped her arm on the trampoline. When she was coming out of the ketamine slumber, she asked why she saw God. It was a little freaky. She also scarfed down 4 PB&J sandwiches afterwards, and I was impressed. The best has to be the sledding accident kid who snapped his tibia. When he was coming out of the ketamine sleep, he kept begging us not to tell his mum he smoked green herb for the first time the day before. His mum was in the room while this was taking place. We had to slide board a patient from the stretcher to his bed after an endoscopy. You put a board between them and the stretcher, and then grab the patient and slide them over to the bed with a sheet underneath them. The patient screamed, "Whee!" and then proceeded to tell us that these are the best substances ever and that it felt like the 60s again. Oh boy, bet that guy was gunning for being put under every time he went to a hospital in the future. Also, a reminder that I have to say the word substances instead of the more common term beginning with D when I mean mind-altering chemicals, because that could demonetize the video. Silly YouTube. When I got my wisdom teeth out, the nurse was trying to wake me up and said, "Okay, it's time to open your eyes. Can you open your eyes for me?" And I said, "Say please." She said please very nicely, and I opened my mouth as wide as I could. Guy wakes up in the recovery room after left knee replacement surgery and starts talking with his wife. "Well, at least I still have 2 good knees." "Oh, honey," she replied, "you just had knee surge," and he interrupts in a loud voice, "My right knee and my weenie." Woke up thinking I'd done the deed with my doctor, and I apologized to him for how bad it was. Well, I fell back asleep again, so thankfully I didn't have to endure a reaction. When I was in high school, I was just getting put under and feeling loopy for a wisdom teeth operation, and the nurse was making small talk with me and told me she graduated from the same high school I went to and was on the dance team, and I told her, "No, you weren't. You have to be pretty to be on the dance team," right before blacking out. I think about this sometimes before I go to sleep at night. Nurse, I am so sorry to do you like that when you were just doing your job. A friend of mine woke up after surgery and stated, "I want to eat a Christmas tree." I had a male patient who, as he woke up, mumbled, "I'm not pregnant?" Are you sure he didn't say, "I'm pregnant? Pregante? Pregnant? Pregnant?" Not a nurse, but I had dental surgery at a hospital in Bangkok a few years ago. I had pretty much come out of anesthesia and was just waiting for the doctor and discharge stuff. There was this giant Aussie guy also in recovery, and he kept trying to sneak away. Like, he'd look around, grab his IV pole, and tiptoe towards the exit. The nurses were just kind of herding him around the room back to his bed, and then he'd do the same thing again. The nurse with me asked if I wanted the curtains closed, and I was like, hell no. I just had major oral surgery and this was funny. So she and I sat there for nearly 20 minutes watching his shenanigans. Nurses have the patience of saints, I swear. My brother got his wisdom teeth out not too long ago. When he woke up, he started laughing a lot. Like, he wasn't laughing super hard, but he was laughing for a long time and it almost sounded monotone. After a couple of minutes of just flatline laughter, he stopped and mumbled, "Chicken," like it's what he was laughing at. Don't know why, but it stopped him from laughing for a while after that. Did a short stint in recovery as part of my graduate program. I got proposed to a couple of times. Same guy would walk past me in the corridor a day later and just not recognize me. How rude. Proposes and then just ignores you just because he didn't like your reply? I was briefly put under for an endoscopy. When I came to, I cried and my nurse was so sweet to me. I kept asking if I'd died and then thanked her for not letting me die, and she was so sweet and legit held me for a minute. I once told the nurses to stop, I wasn't asleep yet. I wasn't ready. They laughed and said they were done. Another time I came out saying sometimes you feel like a nut and sometimes you don't. Almond Joy has nuts and mounds don't. No clue why I was singing this, but the nurses thought I was hilarious and let the family know that it had happened. I had that for a wisdom tooth removal. Woke up, asked why they were putting me out, and they said I was done. I then sat up and felt like the fun part of a week-long bender. It wasn't something he said, but I had a patient in his 50s attempt to motorboat his wife when she came to pick him up. She was mortified and I managed to keep a straight face while giving her all of his post-op instructions. Not anesthesia, but post-op in ICU. Patient had brain surgery for a neuroma. He had a brain drain, but otherwise was fine. I said, "Hi sir, I have your dinner. Do you need help?" "Nah, I can do it. What is it?" It's whitefish." "Ugh." I said, "It's brain food." "If that's the case, I need a whale." I laughed for 2 hours afterwards. When my brother got home after his wisdom teeth, he was on the couch in the TV room laughing, and when we asked what he was laughing about, he said, "This is just the funniest show ever." The TV wasn't even on. I had ankle surgery last year. They gave me animal crackers after, and I remember being really upset that I didn't realize until the last cracker that I forgot to look at the animals and appreciate each one. So I am a nurse. My favorite while I was working was a man who woke up from a double big toe amputation and was super worked up about how he was going to wear flip-flops, until I suggested he try out slides instead. But my favorite coming out of anesthesia story was actually my husband's. I went back to see him in recovery and he was super eager to leave and was trying to remember where he parked, and I said, "Oh, don't worry babe, I'll bring the car around." "You know where the car is?" "I do. I drove us here actually." "You drove us here? Oh my god, you drove us here? Thank you." "You're welcome, I was happy to do it." "Oh my god, you drove us here. Wow." He was close to tears at this point. I took him to lunch afterwards and he nodded off while staring intently at a novelty salt shaker. Oh yeah, I've seen that some people on the old laughing gas are actually just really sweet and appreciative of their partners while it's wearing off. Honestly, super cute. I wonder if there are any stories of them going the opposite way. I mean, I hope not, but curious to see. Backstory: my grandmother desperately needed a hip replacement. She didn't want the surgery, but it had reached the point where my grandfather couldn't care for her unless she got it, and had to give her the ultimatum to either have the surgery or move into assisted living, something she absolutely did not want. She had some onset of dementia, so everyone was extremely worried what the anesthesia would do to her mental condition. After surgery, they were asking her questions to see if the anesthesia had affected her cognitive functions. My grandfather asked, "Do you know who I am?" And her response was, "You're the dirty, rotten little so-and-so who did this to me," as she pointed at her leg. Oh, and she also named both her stuffed cat and her cane George. Anybody else who she didn't immediately recognize by name while the anesthesia wore off was also dubbed George. There was nobody in our family named George. This one's kinda long. I worked in an ER and we had a patient, a guy between 18 to 20 years old, who had spontaneous pneumothorax or a collapsed lung. Not quite as bad as it sounds. He basically had a small area of air between his lung and chest wall. We had to put in a small chest tube to remove the air. We did a moderate sedation, basically kinda knock him out but not put him completely under. One of the meds used was Versed, which has an amnesic effect, so they don't remember anything. The procedure was done and I was monitoring him when he starts coming back around. He looks at me and asks, "So, when are we going to do this thing?" And I said, "We're already done. Look at your chest." We had a drain and dressing in place and he looks down, then looks at me and says, "Dude, how did you do that?" This happened 20 plus years ago and it still makes me laugh. When I got my wisdom teeth removed, I apparently had a very religious experience. I'm an agnostic. I told my mum, who was with me, that I saw people walking on water. Next, I kept telling her that I saw Jesus. Apparently, when the female nurse came back into the room, I did the Catholic sign of the cross and whispered to my mum, "That's him, that's Jesus." The nurse lost her cool somewhat. My family and friends still talk about it several years later. My twin sister started speaking fluent Spanish to my mum after she woke up from getting her wisdom teeth removed. We're half Puerto Rican on our mum's side, so we've grown up hearing Spanish, but neither of us had ever carried a fluent conversation with her in it. But apparently my doped-up sister could. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. "Did you fancy up my Johnson a little bit?" was said to me, the post-op resident nurse, after the patient's vasectomy. Patient here, I went on a long rant about how Bugs Bunny appeared in my dreams and told me lies. No idea how my brain came up with that one. I was coming out of it at the dentist's office when I sat bolt upright and shouted, "You have to save them!" The dentist asked, "Save who?" "The owls." "What owls?" "The owls trapped inside the gas machine. They were hooting. I could hear them. You have to save them." I was coming off anesthesia, and the nurses in the recovery room were all poking fun at each other about which Hogwarts house they'd be in. And I said, "According to my ex-wife, I'm a house elf." I'm not a nurse, but I was in charge of my sister after she got her wisdom teeth out. I got her in the car, and she was bawling. Wouldn't stop crying and trying to put her fingers in her mouth. Mind you, she was 20 at the time. I got her back to my apartment, and she was having a hard time staying upright, so I'm helping support her as we walk up to the door. She's still crying, but is now trying to do a heel click. We almost fall over. My neighbor sees us and runs over to help open my door. We get her inside. She then proceeds to spend another hour crying about how she wants to write a Harry Potter Pride and Prejudice crossover ballet in which she would play Dumbledore, Lizzie Bennet, and Mr. Darcy all herself. I then asked her who I would play. She thought long and hard and said Hedwig and Mr. Collins. That's when it stopped being entertaining. I'm a 26-year-old male nurse and I take care of kids. After surgery, this little girl said in a slurred little voice, "Whoa, a real leprechaun? I have red hair." I had my appendix out, and according to my wife, the doctor came around with a bunch of student doctors and pulled my gown to the side to show the keyhole scars. Now the bottom one is below the pants line, and I wasn't wearing underwear and apparently said, "Don't act like you're not impressed," and then closed my eyes. They all had a good laugh, my wife was mortified, and I was sound asleep. I still hear about it from her almost 10 years later. Not sure if it counts, but during a C-section I was medicated up to the high heavens, and I shouted, "It hurts!" I couldn't actually feel anything. The surgeon panicked and said, "What does it feel like?" I said, triangles." At the dentist, I woke up like a shot from anesthesia, got up and ran through the office, with the dental assistants chasing behind me. I ran to the washroom, still completely medicated up, looked into the mirror, and while pouring at my numb face said, "I need to make sure I don't look like Joan Rivers." A friend of mine said that one of her patients was convinced he was a burrito and needed her to sprinkle cilantro on him. When I got all 4 of my wisdom teeth out at once, I woke up and immediately asked, "Can I eat KFC now?" And they all got a laugh out of that. That was the only thing I cared about. Probably not as entertaining as I'd hoped, but I got a laugh out of them anyhow, so yay! And yes, I did get KFC after. Just a large mashed potato and mac and cheese. Took me 3 days to finish it all, though. Was told it was fine as long as I was careful about my stitches. Answering as someone coming off of anesthesia while in the middle of surgery, I said, "I tried a dog biscuit too," in response to my surgeon telling his colleague how he had to eat a dog biscuit while pledging. Another time I squeaked like a dolphin while in the middle of surgery. Kinda weird that I do remember doing it, and my surgeon was freaked out that I knew I did it. The fact that this happened at all kind of suggests that it's probably not the first or last time in all the many cases of anesthesia, but I can't imagine it would ever not be absolutely horrifying to have the person you're operating on come alive and start making noises, no matter how silly. My God. Anesthesia hits my family pretty hard. Low vitals, takes longer to wake up. It can be pretty scary for my mum, who's usually the caretaker. Last winter, I had an endoscopy and just wasn't waking up. It took me a while to gain awareness after I did arise, and the first thing I remember is asking my mum for pancakes. She responded with a worried, "I know, we'll get pancakes later once you're up to it." I was convinced that she had been reading my mind and was very concerned about her new psychic abilities until they told me I'd been awake for about 30 minutes and had asked for pancakes at least 10 times before I regained awareness. My grandmother gets very angry when she comes off of anesthesia and swears everyone was mistreating her during her surgery. The night after her hip surgery, and lots of angry accusations and having to be tied to the bed for a good portion of the day, I spent the night with her at the hospital. She had a confusing and restless night and was in a lot of pain, but very out of it. The next day, the doctor came in to talk to her about being moved to the rehab center. She started ranting about how it better not be the same place she slept last night because they made her sleep on the concrete floor of a barn. Everyone tried reasoning with her, but she'd just point at me and say, "Ask that girl, she was there." After a few minutes of increasingly agitated ranting, I said, "It's a different place, Nanny," and that settled that. I underwent a procedure and had to be put under anesthesia. According to my dad, who was in the room, the doctor asked me how I was feeling and I said to him, "I feel like crap. Can I go back to hell?" It was funny at the time. I woke up from surgery angry because the anesthesiologist told me he was just giving me oxygen, but then the next thing I knew, I woke up in post-op. I told the nurse, "That witch lied to me," and she just said, "Okay," and went to get my parents. I had a strong dislike of needles and IVs as a teen, so they offered me laughing gas to make it so I didn't care about the needle. I remember them opening my mouth and preparing for surgery, and I was teed off as hell the whole time because the laughing gas just made my eyes itchy. And I cared very much about the needle still, and here they were about to cut my jaw open when I was still awake. Then there was sunshine and a cactus, and then I was in the passenger seat of my mum's car. Apparently they wheeled me out and I briefly came to outside the office, next to that cactus, but I was too medded up and full of gauze to really say anything about it at all. After I got my wisdom teeth out, I was convinced I was Clark Kent and kept taking my glasses off and mumbling, "I'm Superman." And then I cried when they told me they were going to put my teeth in the incinerator because for some reason, medded out me thought they meant all my teeth. I had a nurse say a weird thing to me as I was coming off of anesthesia. I had a baby that died. I had 4 children, but only 3 of them lived. I'd been rushed into the hospital with extreme pain and tons of internal bleeding, and then they found out I had an ectopic pregnancy that had ruptured my fallopian tube, which was a strange surprise because I'd had barely any encounter resembling the kinds that get you pregnant. But I guess one crazy swimmer managed to get up my tubes despite the rarity of my reproductive behavior. I hadn't even missed my time of the month or anything. They zoomed me into surgery and gave me lots of meds. It was a huge relief to have the emergency resolved, and I didn't really think of myself as pregnant with a baby. I mostly just thought, I'm dying, holy crap, they actually know what the F is wrong with me and they're going to fix it with medicine and stuff. Hallelujah, I'm not going to die. Post-surgery, I woke up quite disoriented and alone with a very kind older nurse who promptly told me she had once lost her baby. I was very confused for a long while. I really hadn't even processed that I'd even been pregnant or lost a baby, so I didn't realize she was trying to comfort me by sharing a shared loss. I just thought that this nurse decided to randomly tell me her baby had died as I woke up alone in a room with her, and I was like, oh, that's terrible. You poor stranger, lady, I'm so sorry that happened to you. But why are you telling me this? In retrospect, she was very nice. She'd try to be very kind to someone going through a lot. Thank you, nurse lady. My brother got his wisdom teeth out, and when he woke up, he gestured frantically for a pen and paper. The nurse gave it to him, and he wrote, "Thanks for the pen." I was a student nurse for 2 semesters. On a placement in a post-op ward, an old guy had a reaction to the anesthetic and thought he was back in the Korean War. He kept trying to get out of bed to help his mates. The two nurses couldn't figure out how to stop him, and they called security. Meanwhile, I walked up and in my most officious-sounding voice said to the nurse I was partnered with, "Stand down, Lieutenant, I'll take over from here." She looked confused but moved aside, and I said to him, "Soldier, you took some shrapnel, you need to rest and recover. Now stand down or I'll have you court-martialed for insubordination. Understood?" He looked at me for a second, looked around, replied nice and loud, "Yes, ma'am," and went back to bed. "Drink this juice." And young me said, "Okay, fine." I drank it and fell asleep in under a minute. And after surgery I said, "Mum, why are you laughing?" "Well, you told the nurse that she was a naughty girl and that you had called Dad to punch her." Okay, so not all of the medicated people are the sweet kind, but at least they seem harmless so far, even when they're being defiant and getting out and about against the nurse's wishes. Although I'm sure in the extensive history of using this stuff, somebody has definitely got punchy with it. After my spinal surgery, I was talking about how excited I was that Voldemort wanted to marry me. Okay, Bellatrix. I'm a nurse. All of the level 1 general anesthesia patients were snoozing and in no pain. I was walking by and sneezed. I was almost to the door and I heard a subdued voice say, "Bless you." Never did figure out which patient said it, but it was so sweet. Another time it was a coworker who had had surgery, and when I went to check on them, they wailed, "I just want everyone to like me." It was funny as heck because it was a doctor who used to yell a lot. After her hip surgery, my grandma thought she was fighting in the War of 1812. My wife, who I had been married to for over a year, came out of oral surgery last week and decided that she was going to go tell her mum that she was gay. Her mum replied, "Kaylin, I was at the wedding." It gave me a huge laugh. I don't remember this, but apparently when I woke up from getting my wisdom teeth removed, I wanted to get the teeth back. I was pretty adamant about it, but the dentist compromised by letting me take a picture of them on my phone. I was looking at my phone and saw the picture and I was like, "What's this?" And he explained what had happened. What's the rudest or most wrong thing a mental health professional said to you? I had a psychiatrist who was convinced I was anorexic even though I wasn't. It really sucked because my therapist and my psychiatrist worked at the same company and they had a policy where they don't help people with eating disorders. So even though I went to a specialist and they confirmed I didn't have an eating disorder, I was still banned from that facility and lost my long-term therapist. Nothing. She fell asleep in her chair while writing notes. I was talking about the death of my parents. I was 16 and never went to another therapist. My therapist, whom I've just discontinued, would literally order a meal and eat it right in front of me while literally saying nothing. She did that for the entire year I wasted with her. I was just watching this lady eat her food while saying nothing, only then to give me snarky 2-word replies. At that time, I moved from Berdsk, a small city in the region, to Novosibirsk. In the new school, preventative conversations were held with a psychologist. All of the children told about their dreams, hobbies, and shared their views on life. I said that I love rock and I'd like to spend my youth traveling or working. Apparently, the psychologist wasn't impressed. In front of the whole class, she said, "Are you from Berdsk? That explains why you're so weird. Everything in your city is not of this world." Interpretation of an offensive phrase in Russian hinting that you're crazy. When they say things like, "Okay, I understand how you're feeling, thank you for telling me that," and then proceed to ignore most of the things you've said. At 14, telling my shrink about how I was bullied in school. "Did they make fun of your nose?" "No." And that's how I found out I have a big nose. Also a terrible counselor. You should always ask open-ended questions like, "What did they make fun of you for?" instead of, "Did they make fun of this explicit thing?" "Oh, did they call you chubby dum-dum or little fat ears?" Oh, this is what happens when a school bully takes a fast track to psychiatry. Great little comedic comments adding up into our very serious subject matter here today. But really, I'm truly shocked at how insensitive some of these so-called professionals can be. I was dealing with a lot of family issues at the time, and my ex had just broken up with me that week, so I was taking it fairly hard. My therapist said, "It's because they found someone better." And when I said no and tried to explain, this therapist just dug in deeper that my ex had dumped me because they found someone better than me. This didn't happen to me but to my late father, and I'm still angry. My brother, his only son, had a nervous breakdown after our mother died. He was good through and through. It was like losing two people at once. My father believed, sadly, that my brother would find his way home, but he never lived to see him again. We know he's alive out there. Now, I worked in a funeral home that assisted the coroner's office. If someone passes away, they can take the fingerprints to identify them. Bottom line is, there are many ways that they can identify a deceased person. My father was a trucker, blue-collar kind of guy. When he lost his leg, he lost his ability to work, and he hated it. I'm convinced he would have preferred to die in his truck. He was a provider, but he was a good father and loved his children. The therapist asked why he was depressed, and he said he misses his son. She said, "You know, there's a good chance he's been dead for a while, yet you've continued to live." He was quiet when we got into the car, and I knew something was wrong. Finally, he told me what she'd said. I called the therapist and asked where the frick she got off putting that idea in his head. The man had lost enough. He refused further counseling, and who could blame him? I went to see a counselor who was supposed to help me deal with being repeatedly mistreated when I was younger. The witch kept asking me, "But didn't it feel good? It felt good, right? Just admit it felt good," until I was a sobbing mess. I'm female, and the therapist was also female, which made it all the more difficult to deal with coming from a woman. Mine told me that my dad was in hell after he had committed self-deletion. I was 12. I ran out of there faster than anything. 3 times being sent home and psych ward visit later. "I'll just go back to work, you'll be fine. You don't need different meds." Couple years ago, my partner was trying to find a therapist. In the first few appointments, this woman told her that if she didn't start doing certain things, I'd burn out and leave her. I'd never spoken to this woman in my life, and she knew nothing about me. My girlfriend never went back, after she struggled for a few weeks thinking it might be true before telling me what she said. "Well, you've certainly got a lot going on there," followed by an awkward silence and nothing helpful. It was the first time ever opening up on that level for me. Real bad experience. In high school, I was pretty difficult because of some real intense crap happening in my life. I wasn't on anything or violent or flunking out. However, I had a super rough family home life, as well as some pretty troubling encounters with the opposite gender, and I withdrew because of it. My parents were very Sunday Christian, meaning while at church they're the best Christians ever, but the teachings did not make it home. They still don't understand why only one of their 6 kids talks to them, that kind of thing. Anyway, they gave us no privacy whatsoever. They were always in our phones, our bags, and our rooms, or just in every aspect of our life it offered them control, and I knew it would be no different when they found me a counselor and you know her. Their words. Guys, they sent me to therapy with the pastor's wife. It became super clear she was telling them things immediately, but I held out hope until I couldn't anymore, because I didn't really have proof. I ended up telling her that I got an offender bender, but there was no damage, so it was all good. Well, she told my parents right when I left, I guess, because when I showed up at home, my dad demanded to see my bumpers. They won't admit what happened to this day, but they never made me go again, so there's that at least. Also, I guess this turned out mostly about my parents, but screw them and that so-called counselor too. In short, cheap parents hired a therapist that they knew would give them info. I got suspicious and confirmation after I told a ridiculous lie, and my parents sat me down to talk about it when I'd never told them anything. Since it was a lie, it took years to trust any adult after that, which I still struggle with as a 34-year-old. I was told that there was no point in continuing therapy because I was emotionally devoid and was wasting her time. It was a licensed therapist that I was referred to by my doctor after an emotional breakdown. Ironic much? Her comment came on our 3rd appointment. We'd never clicked, and she had made judgmental comments about my parenting choices in the 1st session, so there wasn't any trust there. I've since found a new therapist who's amazing, and now, 5 years on, I've left a toxic marriage, dropped 2 of the 3 meds I was taking, and am generally thriving. While her comment initially stalled me and left me feeling that there was no hope, I'm now genuinely happy and loving my life. I'm also halfway through my studies to become a counselor myself. I use my creativity with art and crafts as a coping skill and as something that gives me extra purpose in life. A psychologist told me that doing so is maladaptive. I didn't go back. You'll never do an important job like doctor, veterinarian, firefighter, or lawyer or counselor. You'll probably end up in Walmart your whole life. I was 8 years old and still remember how mad my parents were. I'm currently working at an international factory, keeping my money to open my own shelter for stray animals and training them. Got 2 certifications, one for training and one for cooking. Maybe I'll end up cooking new recipes for the stray animals at my shelter, huh? I know a guy who became a dentist out of spite after a conversation like this with a career guidance guy in high school. I was having panic attacks daily, and the meds he gave me made my anxiety worse. Turns out I was just having bad reactions to SSRIs, and that was all he kept trying like a moron. Anyway, I was in his office and he seems to be taking it personally that all the SSRIs he's put me on are giving me seriously bad side effects. Have you just given up then? The moron asks. Do you just want to be like this the rest of your life? Obviously fricking not, that's why I'm in this office trying new medications. I was so angry and yet also having a panic attack at the same time. I ended up just walking out and finding a new psychiatrist later. The day you think you know everything is the day you'll kill someone. It's a pretty popular saying in my side of healthcare. There's definitely some wisdom to that. Being arrogant enough to assume that your first general guess is absolutely right with no room to correct for any new info that comes out isn't a great trait to have at the best of times, but in any medical field? My god, yeah, you could kill someone. And here's our next story about a deluded quack simultaneously trying to make a quick buck off her patients. You need to find religion and also buy the self-help book series that I wrote. For this, it's important to know that I live in Germany. I saw a psychologist once who treats and diagnoses adults with Asperger's. I was there for my second diagnostic interview, and my mother was with me to be interviewed as well. She told the doctor about my sensory issues, especially with noise, because I'd occasionally scream and punch walls and throw stuff around if I was too overloaded with a sound. The psychologist just said something along the lines of, well, 100 years ago people like this would have been treated rather differently around here, huh? And laughed in our faces. Even if he wasn't talking about National Socialist euthanasia, which took place not quite 100 years ago, I still felt incredibly disgusted and angry. The entire interview with him was a disaster, but this was clearly the worst thing he did. Okay, this is actually my mum's story, but it is relevant. 1980s in the UK. My mum is pregnant with me and my dad is, well, he's not a good person. My dad called my mum when she was out, asking her to come home. Mum thought he sounded odd, so asked a friend to come with her. Daddy Dearest is indeed completely blotto, which has brought out all of his angry tendencies, and he fires a 9mm, that God knows where he got it, at my mum. Missed, thankfully. The police are called, a standoff occurs, and it's hours before he's finally taken down. The psychiatrist who treats him afterwards tells my mum, who's bracing herself for a good old-fashioned divorce, not to leave him as he wouldn't cope. F that noise. Unfortunately, they did succeed in guilting Mum into staying, but she got out a few years later and gave me the best childhood. She passed a few years ago now, but damn, she was awesome. Holy frick, I just remembered my ex-husband's psychiatrist called me and implored me to make it work. And a few months later, he tried to off me in a substance-induced rage. Screw all of that. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I had a therapist tell me that my soul, long before I was born, chose my parents and subsequent horrible upbringing so that I could learn from it. By this logic, of course, the victim is always in control and the person ruining their life is helpless. Argue with that logic. Needless to say, I never saw her again. And some clarification, the therapist subscribed to the just world theory, which is often but not always taught in Western psychology. The problem, of course, other than the victim blaming, is the blatant narcissism required to believe someone else exists only to fulfill your soul's destiny by harming you. The people who do this to their kids are 100% responsible for their own behavior, not their targets. I remember giggling to myself after I got home, thinking I should have just kicked her really hard in the face and gone, well, guess your soul must have chosen that for you, huh? I took a psych test, and when we were going over the results, the psychologist implied that all of my mental health issues were due to being too sensitive and were therefore my fault. I remember feeling broken for like a week afterwards, just crying when I was alone. The same guy wrote in my psych report that I was lying on my test, when I'd previously told him I self-report very poorly. If I met this guy in a dark alleyway tomorrow, I'd probably break his self-important nose. I went to see a psychiatrist because I was having symptoms of PTSD after an ex tried to unalive me when I left him, then stalked me, forced his way into my apartment, and committed the unspeakable act on me. The psychiatrist, an older man, told me that I needed to work on my physical appearance and demeanor to be more feminine and demure. Because quality men weren't attracted to women who looked and behaved like me, and if I ever tried to get involved in any other relationship without making myself more appealing to quality men first, I'd end up right back in the same situation. Mine just said, maybe you shouldn't be here. I had better luck with medication. I was fresh out of high school and really not doing very well. No friends, horrible relationship with my mum and stepdad, and nobody to confide in. I gave in after being pressured to see someone because mental health issues run in my family. I booked an hour-long assessment. I was in and out in 20 minutes. The guy completely dismissed me because I was young, and every young person goes through these things. Everyone worries about their future. This is totally normal. It took me 3 years to go back and was admitted after my second appointment. Do you ever have thoughts about not being alive anymore? Yes. Do you have a plan for not being alive anymore? Yes. Do you feel you're a danger to yourself or you'll hurt yourself before your next appointment? Yes. Great, I'll double your Prozac. See you next week. I was a nurse. I know if a patient says those sort of things, it's an instant 24-hour keep in the hospital or admission for monitoring. And I wasn't joking. I meant it 100%. I never went back to that guy. Events happened that kept me from following through instantly with my plan, but I'll never forget that jerk. I left the office thinking, well, even a guy that's paid to care whether I live or die doesn't care. That seals the deal. I had to go to the hospital because I'd sliced myself about 4 years ago. I sat in the room where there are multiple different people and cases going on, so there weren't any walls between the patients. And what does the head nurse do? Oh, we've got a cutter, to the whole damn room. You could see how uncomfortable the other nurses were, and even some policemen looking after someone else looked upset that she had decided to yell it to everyone. Made me feel like complete garbage on top of how I already felt at the time. Well, you make good eye contact and you're an engaging, interesting conversationalist. Clearly you can't have ADHD. My other patients are crystal addicts with no direction in life. You think your problems are as bad as theirs? This guy was apparently an ADHD specialist. I'd been seeing him to try and make sense of my crippling executive dysfunction and lifelong problems with attentiveness. He just spent our sessions telling me my problems weren't bad enough because apparently everyone with an attention disorder is a frickin' delinquent. Also, way to throw your other patients, who are surely coming to you to deal with their own demons, under the bus, my dude. I was explaining to a therapist that I used to run a cancer charity, and part of my depression came from talking to so many people who had lost someone or were in the process of losing someone and being an emotional sponge for them. The therapist then proceeded to tell me about their loved one who had died of cancer. My God, how did some of these people get their licenses? Also, there are idiots like me who have a better idea of conversational cues and safe areas than this bloody guy. Then again, it matches with all of my friends who've told me that they had to really shop around to find their first therapist. When I was 11, I started feeling a lot of anxiety and fear about going to school, church, or basically any place with a lot of people. My brother had been getting therapy for a while, so my parents set me up with a counselor at the same facility. The only session I went to started normally enough. We talked a bit to help get me comfortable. I described what I was experiencing, normal first season stuff. The counselor then asked me to close my eyes and imagine a situation where I felt anxious, and then when I did so, he instructed me to find Jesus there and go to him. Now, I grew up in a religious family, and here, nearly 20 years later, I still believe, but that was not what I was expecting out of an alleged medical professional. Long story short, we did that and nothing else repeatedly for the rest of the hour-long session, aka eternity for an anxious, uncomfortable child. I left with the impression that therapy was bullcrap, and I didn't seek out any mental health care until I was in my 20s. Turns out I've got depression and anxiety issues, and they respond pretty well to medication. If I'd had help from a young age, I might have been able to develop coping skills. Instead, I flunked out of college twice and developed an addiction to alcohol. Oh well, live and learn, I guess. In short, counselor tells young me to find Jesus, so I decide to just live with mental illnesses most of my life. I can't remember the exact wording, but essentially they told me that being an unspeakable act victim, both by a friend and an ex, was invalid because I was a man. And that really messed me up for a while. Made me afraid of getting psychiatric or therapeutic help again for a while until things got really bad. I went back, saw a better therapist at a different clinic, and she actually talked to me about how horrible that person was. It was really helpful. That's called solitary confinement. I'm calling the police right now. Said by my family's counselor when she discovered my elementary school was locking up myself and several other students in tiny closets every day. When I was younger, my sister and mum weren't getting along, and my mum decided we'd see a family counselor. Most of my time with the counselor was easygoing, happy, and short, as I had nothing to do with my sister and mother arguing and screaming at each other all the time. That was until she asked me how school was doing and started digging into what my daily life was like. In 5th grade, I was caught trying to out one of my female teachers for putting down students and cursing at us too. She used to get a rise out of berating one particularly sweet and timid girl in the class. Well, the teacher caught me recording her cursing and sent me to detention for the rest of the year. Detention was 3 small rooms behind the principal's office, with room for just 1 student in each closet-sized cell. They would lock us in, and the only times we were allowed out was for lunch or to join other classes for wall sits in the middle of Arizona summers. We had to knock and ask to use the restroom, which was located in the principal's office area as well, so no chance to see other students. Usually, one of the small rooms, as we called them, was occupied by a mentally handicapped student who would scream and bang his head on the wall. Poor kid who had no clue why they were locking him up in a tiny room. Oh, and if any of us were really bad, they'd turn the lights off on us until whoever was acting up would shut up. This usually made the screaming guy go berserk until he hyperventilated or passed out. Countless days spent plugging my ears and choking back tears. I eventually gouged a small hole under the desk, which was permanently attached to the walls. I disassembled pens and would wrap a note around the ink cartridge, and then pass the note and pen through the wall to whoever was on the other side. This lasted for a large part of that grade, but they eventually found the pen hole and punished all of us with more wall sits in the sun while watching everyone else play at recess. I don't know who these people were running the elementary school, but this stuff changed my perception of the world pretty quickly. I thought I could trust anyone with authority, but after this, I pretty much laugh at anyone that thinks they have some sort of power or authority or seniority over another human being. The counselor called the cops, and we went straight to the school so I could show everyone where the rooms were. I was too terrified to go inside with all of the staff still inside the school. The officer and my counselor assured me that nothing bad would happen to me, but I did refuse to go. They told me the rooms were shut down, but I went a couple of years later and confirmed that they'd just closed them temporarily. A part of me still wants to go and see if they're still using those closets or cells today. Are you a lesbian because of trauma? In most cases, that's what happened. How do your parents deal with your orientation? I was not there about anything even remotely related to my orientation. I'd seen one therapist about various issues affecting me. After a number of sessions and exploration, we got to the cause of my problems being that my mum had died when I was young. I moved and started with a new therapist. I started explaining my background with, "My mum died," to which I got, "You can't blame it all on that." I get that therapists are trained to challenge your lines of thought, but that was annoying as frick. A psychiatrist put me on OxyContins because I told him if there was an antidepressant that made me feel like I do when I have oxys, then I'd feel much better. 10 years ago, things were a lot different, I guess. When I was in my early 20s, I was still a virgin at the time, and it was really upsetting me. A therapist told me it was a good thing, and then showed me pictures of transmitted diseases. She told me that they were God's punishment for immoral behavior, and 1 in 3 people had one. I told her that they were probably irresponsible people that didn't use protection, and she told me that rubber couldn't protect me from God's anger. She then prayed I remained a virgin until marriage, and that I'd no longer desire to commit the sin of premarital whoopee. Looking back, I should have reported her to some sort of therapist licensing board. Also, I've had plenty of fun since about a year after that, and still no diseases. I guess God just isn't angry enough at me. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.